productive morning, a fun morning so far. We're going to get started by talking a little bit about smarter counties here. Smart technology and integrating technology into counties and governments as a whole to better integrate with your infrastructure, better reach your citizens is kind of the hot thing that everyone's talking about. Smart cities, smart counties, what does it all mean? It's a great question. Different people have different visions for it. They have different ideas about what it means. We're going to kind of explore some of those issues here today. If you don't know me, my name is Mitch Curtis. I'm a senior program director with Route 50. How many people know what Route 50 is besides the road? So if you go down. So Route 50 is an online publication, part of Atlantic Media. We focus on state and local government innovation and best practices. There is a lot of technology in what we write about. Hopefully you'll check us out. It's ROUTEFIFTY.com. Subscribe to our newsletter. It's lots of helpful things about what's going on around the country, trends, best practices, and the implications for you all. I'll just leave the shameless plug there for now. And I'll introduce up our panel. First, I'd like to introduce Kenneth Wilson, who's the county administrator for the home county here of Franklin County. He's coming up to the stage. And then next we have Adam Luckhaupt, who is the CIO, Chief Information Officer for Franklin County as well. Followed by Rebecca Hunter of Crown Castle. And last but certainly not least, Bryan Condrey, Chief Information Officer of Chesterfield County, Virginia. All right, so we've got our panel here on stage. I'm going to pull forward a chair just because I'm going to be here a little bit. To start off with, I guess the best place to start is with the person who makes the most decisions, the county administrator, I would say. So to start off, let's talk a little bit about when you hear smarter county, what do you think of, and what is kind of the integration of technology into some of the things you've done mean to you and your citizens?
The first thought that comes to mind is using technology to deliver governmental services in a more effective and efficient manner. Technology's greatest value is to use that to connect people and empower the residents of your community. Within Franklin County, we've initiated a number of collaborations that have, in fact, benefited community members. For example, we partnered with the city of Upper Arlington on a fiber optic project. The county provided a infrastructure bank loan of $1 million, part of a $2.6 million project under the county's Smart Works program through our Economic Development and Planning Department. Within that department, we are being very innovative in initiating programs such as this. We also leverage dollars to tie technology and economic development to provide residents training opportunities to obtain the skill set necessary to be able to step into a number of technology career opportunities. We partner with a not-for-profit, Perscalas, had $300,000 grant program, and that grant program seeded a number of job opportunities for young people within Franklin County.
And how many people have been through the program so far?
So far, we've had over 100 individuals touched by the program itself in that partnership. That is, we coined that program PeopleWorks, and it is designed to close the skill gap in many ways, to look for partnerships where we can give individuals within Franklin County the skill set necessary to fill a number of positions. Be it technology call center positions, be it entry-level IT in programming positions. We have another program that I'm excited about with Tech Core Columbus, where we are literally exposing youth to training to where they're creating applications and working with companies such as J.P. Morgan Chase and are exposed to programming and the science. And we have many of students that are really understanding the value of STEM education as a result of that partnership. Also, as many of you know, the City of Columbus was awarded a Smart Cities grant, $40 million from the U.S. Department of Transportation, another $10 million from Vulcan, Paul Allen Company. In that program, by being a recipient of that grant, it is going to really allow this community to go to the next level as it relates to connectivity, autonomous vehicles, smart mapping, all of these things. And one of the major themes of our application was to connect the disconnected. For example, creating a kiosk system where we will be able to connect individuals in targeted neighborhoods who have transportation challenges to Car2Go, to Uber, Lyft, in connecting with our public transit authority. So we are, the county is a $4 million partner, cash and in-kind contributions towards that particular initiative. And here in Central Ohio, we take pride in public-private partnerships. And as a result of that, we are going to be able to match that grant with over $360 million in counting in public and private investment.
And just a little bit, who's the private sector? Sorry about that, guys. Who are the private sector partners who are coming on board, and why are they coming on board? Why are they excited about this?
It's about economic development. It's about opportunity. We're fortunate here in Central Ohio to have companies such as Honda Motor Company. We have Battelle, which is a worldwide renowned research institution. We have The Ohio State University. We have J.P. Morgan Chase. We have L Brands. And one reason why technology is important in this community is because logistics is everything. Here in Central Ohio, we are within 1 day's drive, 10 hours, to 47% of the U.S. population and 33% of the Canadian population. So technology is very key, and to continue to evolve as a community in that way.
Very cool. Now, just a raise of hands real quick. How many folks here are from a county that's exploring smart technology, or what's often called smart cities? Okay, sizable number. I'd say at least a third to half. How many are interested in pursuing them? Okay. All right. So let's go to Adam really quick, because we've heard some from your county administrator. Don't want to get you in trouble here with any questions I ask, but I do want to ask, when your county administrator or commissioners come to you and say, we'd like to get involved in this, obviously, there's a little bit of nice little starter nest in Columbus with the $50 million there. But how do you get from big idea to here's where the nuts and bolts start hitting the road? Here's what we need to do to get where we want to be to deliver these sort of smart ideas to citizens.
I think it's been an overall theme of this NACo conference is you start with governance, you start with your objective, and you frame what you want to accomplish, and then you start going about how you're going to accomplish it. I think that's key to any major initiative. So often in IT, and in the past in IT, you'd have your new software, your new technology, and then someone would say, well, figure out how to get this done. So you have to start with governance, and you need buy-in. And so by having governance and participation from all the stakeholders, you get that buy-in. And in the case of smart cities, I mean, there's a lot of that going on in Columbus with soliciting public feedback and input.
And as far as your city being prepared, or sorry, apologies, your county being prepared for, doing smart technology, there's a lot of pieces that go into that, right? I mean, it's not just flipping a switch. There has to be a lot in the backbone. I assume you've been working on the things behind the scenes for years to be able to do some of this stuff.
I think that's ongoing at this point. This is the standing up the governance and the methodology, and we're in that phase of the project. So
now, if we could, if you could give one piece of advice on as since you all are probably moving quicker now, I would say, because of the Smart Cities Challenge and what's resulted there. What's the one piece of advice you get to people who are just starting down the path from your perspective?
Get the buy-in. Bring everyone to the table in the beginning, because if you don't do that, then you will find resistance, and also you'll be missing out on great opportunities for new and ideas that you may not have had, innovative ideas. I think John Dunn said that no one's an island, and I operate that way, and our county operates that way.
Now I'm going to jump over to Barry first, next, because I want to kind of draw out from you. You are not a county who just got $50 million thrown into their lap to help with this program, and you are probably a less dense county, I would say, as far as population is concerned. So when you're thinking about smart initiatives, I assume you're coming at it from a different angle. What sort of things are you and your leadership thinking about?
We do see it a little bit differently. Chesterfield is about 400 square miles and about 340,000 citizens. So we were a bedroom community predominantly, a very rural community just 10, 20 years ago, and are now a little bit more dense in some areas. Something else that's very different about Virginia is that cities and counties are, are independent. Okay, so cities do not reside within counties in Virginia. So we don't leverage city infrastructure for things like smart cities and things like that. It occurs to me as I'm listening to this gentleman talk about all the great things they're doing that, and I didn't see that many hands raised when we said who were doing smart initiatives in their counties. I would hazard a guess that most of you are doing something, quote unquote, smart in your counties. You're just not calling it that, right? So that seems to be a pervasive theme with smart technologies and smart counties movement, is that we're all doing a lot of this already, and we're just not calling it smart, right? So we need to. I have a lot of friends who are CIOs, and we talk about this a lot through different mediums, and we need to be careful that we don't overuse this term the way that the cloud was a term that was overused 10 years ago, and 15 years ago it was about e-government, right? All these things that we logically move through because we want to deliver better services for citizens, and we have to adopt these things. Smart technologies are just the last incarnation of that, and at least on the Chesterfield side, more specifically to your question, we focus a lot on the culture, and we focus a lot on the culture of innovation. We have a new county administrator, Dr. Joe Casey, and he talks a lot about having an innovative culture in the organization, about breaking down silos, about not being afraid to take risks in government, which is a very difficult thing for us to get our hands around as public servants. And so we come at it from more of a culture perspective. If I have people who are willing to take risks and are looking for ways to innovate, and they can use the tools that we provide, they will create smart solutions, within our organization. But if you take an organization that doesn't really want to change, and they're not interested in innovation, and they just want the status quo, you can provide them all the tools in all the conferences in the world, and they will not be, quote unquote, smart. So we come at it from a little bit more of the culture side.
So I want to put a page mark on the culture of innovation. I want to come back there, but I wanted to kind of move it over to Rebecca first and go back to some of the infrastructure discussion we were having. What do you see from the outside? Crown Castle does a lot of work around infrastructure and the backbone that makes a lot of the things, the neat ideas that you see on TV or in the movies about the ideal smart technology integrated into government and infrastructure. They're working on those things. What do you see from the outside when you get approached by the public sector saying, we want to do these things? What perspective are they coming? Are they coming from the culture perspective? Or are they coming from the, we have these tools and we want to put them forward? Where are they coming from?
Well, thank you. And Crown Castle, so we're an infrastructure provider. We have the traditional towers that everybody's pretty used to. We do a lot in the small cell right-of-way space and fiber. So it really is not consistent at this point. I think back to some of what is the definition of a smart community? There's no definition. There's multiple people who are approaching it from different perspectives. And so when we look at it, I think a lot of communities do find an application that they want or for a use case that they may want to employ. And regardless of what that is, I think we've heard here, you really have to have what your objective is. What is your policy? How does your county different than somebody else's, county? So it has to be a very local decision on what is your strategy about what it means to you to be smart. In some cases, we see the first step is just working cross-functionally within your county, spaces, your public works and your planning and your county administrative offices, and all those people coming together and with a common objective. Because without that common objective, it's very hard to then follow through on an implementation strategy and to really get the most benefit out of your community engagement and the use cases that your policy wants to enhance. And from our perspective, the foundational infrastructure, so the fiber connectivity, the cloud or whatever, the data center piece of it, your data management piece, your wireless component, because as you move into smart community, the majority of it has a wireless component, whether it be a commercial small cell, which I'm sure many of you are seeing in your communities, whether it be a sensor, some sort of sensor technology, automated meter reading, which some people consider smart, which a lot of you have done or a long time ago. Some people rolling that into what a smart county looks like. But ultimately, that foundational infrastructure, really, if you stop and you look at it from a strategic point of view, so you don't have to modify that base layer when you do change policies or certain aspects of a county, a rural aspect of a county may need this policy implementation versus a denser urban area may need a different policy implementation. So we really encourage people, no matter where your starting point is, to stop and really come up with a plan and a strategic plan that can serve your constituents. And I think the piece about the community engagement, really engaging your citizens and making sure they understand that to get the use cases, the applications, the connectivity they want, there are these infrastructure pieces that have to happen. And I think a lot of times in venues like this or discussions we focus an awful lot on those applications and the end product. And so then when you come in and want a small cell deployment or a sensor on a streetlight pole, your citizenry are like, whoa, what is that? No, we wanted this great fancy application, but they really weren't understanding what that entire end-to-end solution for your county might be.
So, I want to go back to Adam and Administrator Wilson and kind of talk real quick about how you choose. You all probably have a lot of folks, as everyone who's in a county government leadership role has, coming at you saying, this is a great idea for a program or for a smart city solution or a smart county solution or integrating this or that. How do you choose the right partners? How do you analyze what makes sense to move forward with, where you're going to have the most impact, whether it's applying for the right grants? We all have limited time and limited possibilities to do that, or finding the right public-private partnerships, or frankly, the right thing to purchase.
When there's limited resources, it comes down to the best projected outcomes. What is the return on the investment? And how sound is your plan to deliver those projected outcomes is what drives the decisions when you're making decisions with limited pools of money available.
And Adam, do you have any experience with folks coming forward that kind of where you finding the right relationship versus, you don't need to be too specific perhaps, but finding the right relationship versus ones that may just be exciting but may not infrastructure-wise or otherwise be the right fit?
I think every CIO in this room has those kind of situations. And the same thing as County Administrator Kenneth Wilson said is, we do look for the biggest bang for our buck, and we're looking for solutions that will integrate with other solutions that we can leverage. I try to, back in 10 years ago, you used to build everything. And so I try to find off-the-shelf solutions that are cost-effective. That way we're not building everything. We're not beholden to staff that may turn over. I always try to approach everything off the shelf first, but customizable. So it's customizable for our environment.
One of the things that I benefit from having around me is a healthy debate between my CIO and my budget director. I find that conflict as healthy. That is positive conflict as county administrator, because constantly Adam has the ideals and you need a fiscal watchdog to say, okay, so when does it pay off? So when we look at approaching projects, that is a constant measurement. We budget by what we call it BPRO for short, budgeting for policy results and outcomes. So we use that to drive decisions, whether it's IT, whether it's the delivery of social services. We are always asking the question, each year when the budget cycle comes around, what outcomes are we getting for the investment that we're making? Adam may want to touch on the journey we went through to implement an ECM solution in our child support enforcement agency. I mean, this was a very paper-intensive agency. For years, the entire basement of this agency was just files upon files upon files. And we had to talk about how do we create a smarter workflow and eliminate the paper. And then you have the policy discussions. Well, how much back scanning and how do we, do we go from just, we keep all this paper according to our record retention schedule and move forward or backward? I'll let Adam touch a little bit on that project.
Yeah, we basically had a child support enforcement. They were fully paper-based. There was no automation. They used the mainframe system provided by the state of Ohio called SETS. And so what we did was we implemented an on-base solution, and we also implemented screen scraping. So we would just mine data from the mainframe, and then that would feed the on-base system so there wasn't dual entry. And it was an agency with an active caseload of 80,000. And so they've saved so much time. Because you have your attorneys, you have your caseworkers, you're having people trying to do establishment, all these different areas needed those same files. Now they have instant access to it, and it's definitely more efficient. And when we did this project, we said, through attrition, we expect some staff reductions, and we'll see that.
Now, and part of that's the managing the legacy 90% versus diving into this 10% of excitement, and I think that's part of the conversation here. To pull in Barry, what do you see when you're looking at staying on the leading edge without going into the bleeding edge, so to speak?
Yeah. I thought it was a really great comment about your application that you mentioned, and we all have portfolios of applications that need to be modernized, right? And as soon as we modernize them, we go back to the beginning of the list, and that thing that we modernized first needs to be modernized again 10 years from now. So it's a constant cycle of modernizing the applications and the technologies. Every one of those is an opportunity. Like you took the opportunity to put in smart technologies and to treat it with a smart perspective. Every one of those application modernizations that we go through, we should have that mindset. And we should look for points of interface, not just silos of information. We should think about how the data integrates. Are we going to build the data from this system into a larger data repository for analytics? Are there opportunities for partnerships? here. I think the original question was about your vendors and the consultants and the partners that you have, and you have Ohio State in your backyard, right? So major research universities can be tremendous partners when you're looking to implement the technologies that undergird a lot of this. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that, when we're talking about smarter solutions is all about is it's about integration, right? Making sure the right data is getting to the right people at the right time, or providing more heaps of data on top of it to do more interesting things, right? But that comes with a lot of very difficult things to manage. Rebecca, when you see people going down that path, what are some of the things what are the conversations that you're having with them around integrating data or managing it, or even capacity-wise, what are the things they should be keeping in mind?
Well, so again, we come at it from a very infrastructure, kind of agnostic perspective, and what we're seeing is the need for high-quality, instantaneous video analytics as one example, and it requires, so what kind of infrastructure again does that require, to process it? There's a lot of conversation earlier in the IT meeting. There was a lot of discussion about that. What do you do with the data? How do you process the data? How do you store the data? And that is one component of, like I said, a very strategic view, a very long-term view of how do you address foundational infrastructure needs that you have in your county. You don't want to be doing it, I think, as I said earlier, every 5 years to completely reinvent every system and every infrastructure piece that you touch in the county. So for us, it really comes back to partnering with folks first and foremost on strategy, on strategically looking at what you have. And a lot of counties, I don't know what you have. A lot of cities and counties, do you own your streetlights? Do you not own your streetlights? Do you have fiber in the ground? Do you know where it is right now? Do you know how much you're using? Do you know how much dark fiber you have? So there really are some foundational things that counties can do if you haven't started down this path to quantify what assets you have, to quantify and understand and be able to utilize what you have as a starting point and then to build on. And again, it comes back to, I think, policy. What's your objective? No two are the same. There's some commonality, again, of infrastructure, data management needs. But ultimately, what policies and objectives, and as long as the county comes together department by department along with your commissions or elected officials, and you're all moving in the same direction, you will find that it's a much smoother process. When you have one area moving in a direction...
Mood lighting.
Ooh.
Who leaned on a switch?
And then you get down the...
Somebody bumped up against the switch.
And you get down the road and you find out that one department that you didn't speak to, and there might be an implication for them that you weren't aware of because they weren't, integrated in the initial conversations. So that's usually the way we approach it.
Now, I want to shift gears, and I'm going to open this up to the whole panel, really. Security, cybersecurity, general physical security, both mesh together when we start talking about integrating data and people and operations and so on. So as we think about, being able to do more when FirstNet, the public safety broadband network, comes online, we're able to track where our emergency response is even more integrated. Or we start talking about, hooking up our public transit and collecting more data through more sensors. That's all things, or health data of those who are interacting with our county. Those are all things that are ripe for interference or for havoc in some ways. What are the things that you all are keeping in mind as you go into this exciting world of hooking everything up together?
Everybody looks at me. Why are you looking at me? So, I think it's back to the organization. And if you have a strong information security program already, you're well prepared to take on the challenges of increased integration, interfaces, and being more open with your data. That's really where you need to spend your time if you want to be prepared for this. I don't think there's anything specific about smart counties or what we're talking about that's new from a security perspective. It's a lot of repackaging of existing technologies and things that we currently deal with. How do you classify data? You know, how do you partition it? How do you protect it? How do you provide access to it? Who owns the data? Who's the data owner? Who's the data steward? These are all very fundamental things that you need to have straight for the rest of your organization, even outside of the SMART initiatives that you may have.
Yeah, and to build upon that, we're taking a multi-pronged approach to cybersecurity. So we're reinforcing our infrastructure. That's and we've made significant investments in cybersecurity on that. Cybersecurity insurance, it's a must-have, and especially for a county of our size. Education programs. And then in 2018, there'll be an initiative to identify all of our data sets in the name of cybersecurity, but at the same time, we're going to look at our data sets and create data dictionaries for them, find out what the meaning of that data is, where there's cross-agency, cross-purpose applications of that data, and then have a full data governance program. And I think that's critical to moving forward, especially when you're talking about the Internet of Things interacting with the data stores that you've had for 30 years.
Now, for the administrator, I had a conversation with San Antonio's mayor a little while back, and she said, we're doing a lot in smart cities in San Antonio, but in 5 to 10 years, we're just going to call it cities. So when it comes to counties, you see more of this down the path. How do you see adoption coming? How do you see your citizens reacting to it and absorbing it? And how do you deal with those who, from an equity lens perhaps, are maybe not able to, either from technologically savvy standpoint or maybe more rural or what have you? How are you making sure everyone gains from this and in the right manner?
I think that this is one of those areas for improvement. You think about smartphone adaptation, it has significantly increased, but in most cases, the amount of data that you're able to receive is limited in some cases. So it is the area where we need to continue to collaborate to make broadband access more affordable. The infrastructure is there. It's a matter of establishing more partnerships to make that access more affordable. I think that in Franklin County, we have a growing population. We have a very diverse community. A lot of people coming in from all over the world coming to places like Franklin County. And with that, I think there is a natural acceptance of technology. But the technology has to work for individuals for them to embrace it. I know within our Department of Job and Family Services, for example, this is something that we work to use technology more to eliminate the frustration of our customers when they call in to our call center. We have a goal of not having the call to get dropped off, but a call will be picked up by a system, and we will keep that person in the queue until they get the assistance they need. When you have bad experiences with technology, that's when people turn it off. You hear of auto manufacturers that put too much technology in vehicles, and consumers are going to the dealership asking the technicians, how can I cut this stuff off? So the key is for the counties, particularly counties, to invest in technology that works. I know that sounds flip, it sounds like, but that is really what we need to do. We need technology that is practical, that works, and have the really smart people in the back that make it work, but it needs to work for the average Jane and the average Joe.
And it's hard work, but I'd like to open it up. We have about 10 minutes left, so I'd like to open it up and see if we have some questions from the audience. And I think I've stolen all the mics, so I'm going to pass these over. stay patient for now.
You know, while he's doing that, if I could point one thing out about what you said, sir. You know, I think we focused a lot, especially in counties like my own, on availability of the internet and availability of broadband. You know, to how many addresses can get broadband access in my county. Nobody asked the question how many can afford it. Mm-hmm. Right? I can tell you to the 0.1% how many residential parcels have broadband and how many different providers in my county. I can't tell you how many can actually, you know, afford to pay for it. And so as we look at engagement, which is one of the tenets of smart communities, you know, it's tough for them to engage if they're not on the web, if they're not connected to us. So,
Excellent point. Yes.
So I've got a question to the panel in general. Everybody wants to be a smart community, be considered to be a smart community. But how do you sustain and even grow that investment in a smart community? In an era where you have declining budgets, you've got budget challenges you have to make. Is it a form of government that makes it happen? Is it community engagement? Is it all of these things? I'd be very interested to find how do you sustain this?
that's a good question. One of the initiatives that we had, actually, we're very fiscally prudent locality. We're AAA bond rated county, so everything has to pass a very strict financial ROI sniff test. Right? So one of the smart initiatives we had was the conversion of a mainframe system that drove our social services programs to using the Microsoft government cloud and some applications that were developed there. And that we ended up saving $1 million on it. It took half as long to implement, and it met all the sniff tests. So I think in many cases you can find opportunities. Just because it's a smart thing and it's technology based doesn't mean you're going to spend extra money on it. It means you may end up saving money along the way.
And the key to sustainability, in my opinion, is collaboration. You can't sustain being a smart county or a smart city through governmental funding alone. You can't aspire to do that and be successful in the long run. You have to leverage assets that are in your community. You have to connect with your business community that are going to make these investments anyway. Through public-private partnerships is how you build sustainability. Because as a community, it's not an option whether you become smarter, in my opinion. Affordability, as this gentleman pointed out, is very key, because in today's world, I see access to technology or availability as a public utility. That is really what it's become. So it's really not an option, in my opinion, for sustainable growing communities to not have this infrastructure available. And again, I think the key is through collaborations and partnerships is how you build sustainability. Because you can't create, we need to eliminate technology being like the toll road. If you don't have a toll, you can't access the service.
Question up front?
Yes, my name is James Neal. I live in Washington, D.C. I work for the Institute of Museum and Library Services. I'm interested in how smart communities can be deployed or implemented through our anchor institutions, our schools, our libraries, and our health and services, human services organizations.
Great question.
So Crown, we're a member of Shelby Schools, Healthcare's Library Broadband Coalition. We work in E-rate, in the E-rate space as well, which is education rate fiber, which I'm sure a lot of you probably are familiar with. And I think this kind of goes back to a point I was thinking of the previous question is I personally, and I think Crown, we see anchor institutions, especially in some of those places that are struggling with how do you fund the development of some of these, foundational infrastructure, are your anchor institutions. It's not perfect, it's not ubiquitous at the point, but it is an initial step. And so what I was saying, is you don't have to get to the finish line in one day. I think that's the other thing that a lot of smart communities or cities or counties that we talk to, you want to be first. You want to be fancy. You want to be, you try to push that envelope maybe a little faster than you need to, and you can really think more about phasing things in. Get your infrastructure in place and really, again, find out what is the objective. You don't need to have every new shiny application or use case. What makes sense, and build on your schools, healthcare institutions, libraries, as that first entry point, if that's what you can do. If that's the first step and you can really use that, we are very supportive of that. And again, we participate throughout the country in those programs.
I think we have time for one more question. Maybe two if we're lucky.
To go along the theme of the two previous questions, are there any examples of where counties have gotten together on a regional basis to partner the infrastructure and the technology for IT activities? There were some examples. I know the two counties to the east of me can never afford what we could do.
Yeah, we have quite a few examples. One is through the ARA funding, there was a data center built in Westerville, and it's called WeConnect. And what that was, it was a public-private partnership, and what it served as was an incubator, so that if small businesses, if they wanted to co-locate there, it was available. Like I said, it's a Tier 3 data center with two different power feeds, one from Westerville Power and one from AEP. They have the full generator backup systems. And so we actually co-locate our failover site there. And so multiple counties and small municipalities use that. That's one example. Another example is our mass notification system. We've implemented Everbridge across the entire scope of Franklin County. Delaware County is joining, and all the municipalities are using that. City of Columbus, every one of the areas around us, and then we're inviting other counties to join that as well. So and that's just a small example. Our social service agencies, there's tons of collaboration between our social service agencies all the way through the whole state.
Barry?
You see a lot of collaboration with public safety, frankly. Radio systems and data systems that drive when calls for mutual aid and so forth, fire, police, sheriff. A lot of cooperation, a lot of collaboration there on systems. We don't see so much things like data centers being built and so forth, shared services in Virginia, but we do have a tremendous amount of cooperation between localities. When we were picking an enterprise land management system to govern permitting and so forth, and land disturbance, land development, the fact that the county to our north had just implemented something just like that, was very key in our decision for what we went with, because we wanted all the businesses to have a very consistent experience across the different localities. So that's sort of our experience.
I'll add that there's a whole lot going on in the collaboration space there, just because as there's two reasons. One is, as you mentioned, there's financial incentives for everyone involved. The more people you can get together and bring a project to scale, the more likely it is to succeed, and it's more likely you're going to get more data and more opportunities to kind of harness that data in various ways that make it more useful to citizens, to government, and so on. So I think partnerships are the way to go. I'm going to put in another plug here. We're actually going to have this evening a Cocktails and Conversation Route 50 at 5:15 here in the Hyatt. We'll be talking about intergovernmental partnerships, including such as the smart cities in Columbus and across Ohio as a whole. I'm getting beeped at, which means we're pretty much out of time, but I want to give a chance to the gentleman in front in the purple shirt to ask a question real quick, because I did shortchange him earlier, and then we will turn over to the next group.
Okay, so some smart community county initiatives begin by determining what we feel is best for the citizens, and we have this philosophy that we'll build it and they will come. In some cases they have come, in some cases they've never come. But today in the 21st century, I'm seeing more counties and communities engage the citizens first, identifying what it is that they really want and need and are interested in, and then pursuing those initiatives. Are you doing anything in that area with anything that you're pursuing where you're tying closely to the community at the beginning rather than just building it and hoping they come?
I think that's where collaboration is key, because you see where success is. An example I will point to is in southwestern part of Franklin County. The city of Grove City is the second largest suburban community within Franklin County, but it does not have the high-speed broadband access of other parts of Franklin County, even though it's a growing community. They are collaborating with the Solid Waste Authority of Central Ohio, as well as Southwestern City Schools, which is the second largest school district in Franklin County and one of the largest in the entire state of Ohio. And we are partnering with a number of townships. And it has been through studies that have been done. You know that one of the keys to economic development is having access, businesses having access, individuals having access to broadband access. So I think that community engagement, community surveys, and that type of thing is in fact important. You wouldn't necessarily, for example, part of the Smart Columbus proposal, you wouldn't necessarily link infant mortality to technology. But as a part of that proposal, when I talked about connecting the disconnected, one of the goals is to address this larger identified problem that has been studied and is particularly high in particular zip codes, and there's been a number of community forums in these targeted neighborhoods to ask the citizenry, how can we make transportation work for you to increase the likelihood that you won't miss those critical prenatal appointments, for example. Or if you are managing a chronic disease such as diabetes, in order to increase the likelihood that you can reach access to care. So I think that's one way to try to get at what you're talking about, to make sure when you make those investments, they actually address a need and connect to something that the community needs. Because with technology, I understand what you're saying. Without that engagement, you can build a bridge to nowhere.
We'd love to keep going, but I'm sure we could all day. But we have another panel, and I'll get the hook from Alan if I don't stop the panel right now. So with that, let's thank our panel for taking the time to talk with us today. And next up, we will have the Save Money with NACo's Cooperative Purchasing Program, the U.S. Communities discussion. I will introduce the folks who are coming up on stage now. Oh, wait. Oh, we've got 10 minutes. Oh, okay. We've got some time. We've got 10 minutes. Why don't you guys feast your eyes on the wraps and such across the room and grab some food, and then we'll come back and go from there. So thank you guys for joining us, and we'll be back in 10 minutes.
here to talk.
As Jeff said, my name is Dane Windsor. I am a Regional Development Manager with the National Association of Counties Financial Services Center in support of U.S. Communities programs. A little bit of a mouthful. If there's anything you remember, it's two magic words: save money. That's what we're here to do. And real quick before we get kicked off, I have a little bit of a housekeeping item I want to take care of. Just in appreciation of your participation, we have a GoPro Hero 5 today, which we will be raffling, or not raffling, but having a winning drawing here today. So if you would please take a business card out. We're going to have Charlie here come around and collect them. It may be quicker if you can hand them all to one person at the table, and Charlie can come by with the bin and you just drop it in there. But go ahead, Charlie, if you want to start working your way around. Sure, by all means. So when we're done here today, please stick around. We're going to be drawing this off today, so you will be walking out of this room with it if you are the lucky winner. Now, diving into it, I'm here to introduce a few people. First person I want to point out is Kyle Klein. He just stepped over the side of the room. He will be introducing a speaker today as well. But digging right into it, I'm here to introduce someone with RICO. His name is Mike Stowell. He is the National Account Manager in support of the U.S. Communities Program. RICO specializes in printing and document management services, and RICO is actually the largest supplier on the U.S. Communities platform. He's got some unique solutions to outline to you today, which they have been offering to state and local government, providing those unique solutions. So Mike, if you would, come on up, please.
Good afternoon. Everybody hear me all right? Well, I want to take this opportunity and just say thank you to NACo. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. One of the great things that I have the privilege and responsibility in doing is representing the U.S. Communities Program for RICO across all 50 states. So I thought, what a great panel just before here when we're talking about smarter counties, using new technologies, using data. So I kind of want to bridge that between how we're doing here. Small little company you may or may not have heard of that I have shown up here on the board. Amazon, you may have heard of them. Kind of a big deal, I guess, they tell me. One of the things that our company did back in 2015, we partnered with Amazon with their intelligent and digital lockers. So you may be asking, okay, I know what lockers are. What are intelligent or digital lockers? What does that mean? Well, think about it in your county today. When the UPS or FedEx or USPS service gets to your organization, to your building, they have a cart of packages that they drop off at the department. They could have 1, they could have 10, they could have 20. They drop that with an individual. The individual then has to take that around to the county, make sure that all the packages come in, get signed for, they get to the right person, and that they don't get lost. So what we did with Amazon, we partnered up to team up with this intelligent locker system. So what happens when your package arrives, as opposed to being left with one person or one department, it is actually put in a digital locker. When it gets inside that locker, it actually sends you a text message or an email with a one-time use code that secures your package. So talk about an intelligent delivery system that secures packages, especially if we're talking cell phones, laptops, mobile devices, routers, different things like that that could be of importance. So again, being that this is a tech town hall, talking about smarter counties, I want to share some solutions that we're utilizing within a lot of counties today. So not only do we have these, but we've partnered with a lot of you in facilitating some of this. Another one is another small company you might have heard of, IBM and Watson. I'm sure you probably heard some talk of these guys as well too. Back in February of this year, we launched a partnership with them with IBM Watson, where our interactive whiteboards can actually translate meeting notes into multiple languages, into over 80 languages. So think about your weekly meetings with your county commissioners that are streamed live. Wouldn't it be great if you had this technology where you could take the transcripts of that and publish those in 80+ languages that you could post on your website? Oh, by the way, it doesn't require any hiring of additional people or personnel. So again, we have this technology. You can sync these whiteboards up into multiple areas and also translating these services. So again, some unique things that we do, and besides obviously our what we manufacture between print, copy, and scan. And lastly, I know we're limited on time. I appreciate your attentiveness and attention through this. We're actually highlighting this in our booth here. This is our virtual technology. So this can take the place of a lot of different things. Does anybody know who might be in that bottom left-hand corner? That's actually William Booth, founder of the Salvation Army, I guess, if you will. So you will see him in their Alexandria, Virginia headquarters. Not him personally, but him in the late 1800s before his passing. But he is there to greet people that come into their building and help direct and navigate them through, provide information, direct them to specific departments. It is a hologram image that uses our RICO short throw technology. So it actually has a RICO projector that sits about 6 inches right behind that it actually displays that. And again, you can see it takes the form of a lot of different things. In the top left-hand corner up there is our virtual receptionist. So your county may be facing budget cuts where you don't have somebody to greet somebody or direct them. This person can, greet them, can recognize them, can actually send emails, text messages, and greetings to them. So some exciting technology. We actually have it in our booth, in booth 616. But again, we want to thank NACo. We certainly appreciate our sponsorship and our partnership with them. I appreciate your attentiveness and time, and look forward to working with many of you more in the future. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Klein. As Dane mentioned in the introductions, I am also a regional development manager for NACo. I am dedicated to the U.S. Communities Cooperative Purchasing Program. We're so glad that you all are here with us today and to learn how you can save money. So as Dane mentioned, if there is one phrase that you walk away with today, we hope that it is save money, and you consider the U.S. Communities Program as the Save Money program. So it's my honor to introduce our next speaker. Thomas Mcclellan is with Symantec. He is the Director of Government Affairs for Symantec. Prior to Symantec, he was on staff with the National Governors Association, which, as you may not know, the National Governors Association is also a national sponsor of the U.S. Communities Cooperative Purchasing Program, along with the Conference of Mayors, the League of Cities, and the Association of School Business Officials. And of course, the U.S. Communities Program was co-founded by NACo in the early days. So it's an honor to have Thomas with us. He is, as I mentioned, Director of Policy and Government Affairs. He's going to talk about the threat protection solutions, information protection, and also cybersecurity services that Symantec offers as part of the U.S. Communities Program at their best overall government pricing, of course, as all our suppliers agree to on the program offering you that savings. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Thomas. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We good? Can you hear me? Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thomas Mcclellan with Symantec, as was mentioned. So we're the world's largest cybersecurity company. Does anybody here care about cybersecurity? Does anybody care about budget? So cybersecurity continues to be one of the top pressing issues. You may not be a technology. You may be an elected official in here. You might be a technologist. So when I used to train governors on disaster response, we would always teach them kind of the initial mantra, from day one, a disaster, you may not get elected based on a disaster, your preparedness stance, but it can certainly cripple your agenda. So if you're an elected official, think about cyber and think about how that could hobble your own agenda. So do people care about budget? So cybersecurity, if you do it right, is going to be expensive. And generally, excuse me. So generally in the government sector, they spend about 12 to 15% of their IT spend on cybersecurity. The private sector is anywhere from 10 to 12%. States and counties is a heck of a lot less. And so you have to begin to think about your budgeting practices. You have to begin thinking about how you drive innovation into your solutions, into your county solutions. But then you also have to leverage some of the bulk purchasing agreements that are out there. So let me ask another question. Everybody cares about cybersecurity. How many people are buying cybersecurity off a U.S. community schedule or something like that? Okay, so if you care about cybersecurity, if you care about budgeting, you care about kind of, your own agenda, your own security of the citizens that in your county, you should really take advantage of something like a Symantec. You can buy us through one of our partners called Insight. You get the best pricing possible. My suggestion, and every time I go out and talk to governors or mayors or legislators or county officials, they talk about budget, they talk about budget, they talk about budget. It's always the number one concern. I offer you two suggestions. One is try to turn that equation around and begin to look at where you're spending your dollars, how you begin to figure out where those dollars are going, if they're buying down the risk that you want to do, that you want. And then also begin to look at, are we leveraging every bulk purchasing agreement? Can we partner with a local county who's next door to us? Can we buy through a U.S. Communities? You can certainly buy the best cybersecurity through a company like Symantec through that vehicle. So I know you're going to hear from me later on with another panel. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the strategic threats. But thank you all very much. U.S. Communities is a great partner with Symantec. They can be a great friend to you, and they can save your county's money. You can get good stuff done. Have a great lunch, and we'll see you in a couple hours.
Okay, and now for the moment you've all been waiting for. Hopefully. Did everybody have a chance to enter the raffle? Okay, let's do it. Tom Whiston from Morrow County, Ohio. Congratulations, Tom. Well, on behalf of U.S. Communities, we would like to just thank you again for your time and attention today. We noticed there weren't very many hands that went up when some of the questions about whether or not you're utilizing U.S. Communities, and we hope that'll change. And if you have questions about anything, our staff will be around to answer those questions, and we'll be glad to partner with you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Everyone. I hope everybody's enjoying their lunch, and so far, how is everybody feeling about the program? All good? I'm going to assume that's all satisfaction, all that quietness and chewing. We've had some great programming so far. Congratulations so far to PTI, Public Technology Institute, NACo, for putting together a great program, and thank you for inviting me to be part of it. Up next, to introduce General Allen is a man who needs no introduction around these parts. President of National Association of Counties, Bryan and Commissioner of Leon County, Florida.
Thank you all. How's everybody doing? Good? All right. Well, I'm Bryan I'm the current president of the National Association of Counties, and that's what I will be doing for the next 2 days until they kick me to the curb and Roy Charles Brooks takes over. But it has been the ride of a lifetime, and I really appreciate all the relationships and all the chance I've gotten over the last year to meet a lot of people around the country and work with everybody. So, and I get the distinct honor today of introducing John Allen, who is a retired now 4-star general and past deputy commander of the U.S. Central Command. He has served in Afghanistan. He has served in Iran, Iraq. He has, if I listed all of the awards that he has received, he would have to have a wheelbarrow to bring them up here. I don't think they would fit on his uniform. But he's going to be talking about cyber threats to the counties, and I think it's certainly a relevant topic for all of us today. I want to say thanks again for all the work that y'all have done and all the things that are going on out in the country today. I think it's a pivotal time in American politics, and I think, frankly, in my opinion, counties are where the rubber meets the road and we're the people delivering the services, and we're the guys that are out there making things happen, and without all of y'all, I don't think that would happen. So with that, I would ask General Allen to come up, and we will hand it off. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bryan. Thanks very much. My honor. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. We on? Great. Ladies and gentlemen, it's wonderful to be here with you today. I really am honored to be in your presence because so much of what makes America the great nation that it is, and I've spent a lot of time around the world, is what happens at the county level. It really is, as Bryan said, and Bryan, thank you for your wonderful introduction. It really is where the rubber meets the road, and it is where the effectiveness of our nation really plays out on a moment-to-moment basis. And in a conference like this, where you have the opportunity to come together, to restore old friendships, to network, to have lessons learned, to just learn new things, it's an opportunity for me, and I want to thank Linda Langston and Mike Griffin for helping me with Bryan to have the opportunity to speak to you for a few minutes today. It's an opportunity for me to thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for everything you're doing for our citizens every single day. But I want to tell you something a little bit different than perhaps you might have expected in a briefing at this conference is I have come to believe, and I spent 42 years in uniform, fought in 4 wars. I have come to believe that the great threat to our democracy today is not going to be held at bay by our Marines or our soldiers or our sailors and airmen overseas. We will always fight overseas to keep the enemy at bay. But we have seen now that this enemy can reach into the heartland of America. And we know that this enemy is intent ultimately on striking a blow against the institutions of democracy in America, to try to create a crisis of confidence of American citizens in their democratic institutions and in the process of democracy, our voting. This is quite a revelation to me, having spent most of my time growing up in our Corps overseas, and in Afghanistan for a long period of time, and in Iraq for a long period of time, and ultimately leading Marines in at the very end of the wars in the Balkans, into Sarajevo, when 40-story buildings were still burning. But today, the threat is very real, and today, in so many ways, the U.S. counties are on the front line of democracy, and I truly believe that. So it was important to me to have the opportunity to come speak to you. I'm retired from the Corps now, and I spent 3 years after I retired helping John Kerry with the Middle East peace process. So I spent 13 out of 15 months in the Middle East with the Palestinians and the Israelis. And then when the Islamic State invaded Iraq in the spring of 2014, the president asked me to put together for him a global coalition to fight ISIL. So it's about 45 years of service all told, and I've had a chance to spend a lot of time around the world, and I've seen this cyber threat in action. I have seen it emerge, and I believe it is actually focused on you now, and we have seen that evidence in the last election. So we were going to talk about a slide clicker, okay? Never let a general near a slide clicker. And they have withheld it from me. Sharp objects, computers, slide clickers, and things that explode. It's a long list of things generals never touch. Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. Now we're going to see if this works. There it does. Okay, can you all see me if I get down here? I grew up in a world where the preponderance of the enemy threat was in the physical sphere. And you know these people. You've seen them before. In the upper left-hand corner, we have what they called the little green men who facilitated the invasion into the Ukraine and ultimately severed Crimea from the Ukraine in a massive violation of international law. Upper right-hand corner are Chinese special operators, special forces. Had to deal with them in East Asia. Lower left-hand corner was one of the worst problems that we've had for our nation, and that's the image of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps special operators called the Quds Force, Jerusalem Force. And in the lower right, you're hearing about these folks all the time. It's the North Koreans. What you're hearing about the North Koreans is primarily about the ballistic missile program. You're hearing about the North Koreans' nuclear program, and they're both quite viable. They're actually quite a threat. But you'll hear in a moment that the North Koreans have a threat that's reaching straight into your counties. And then in the middle, you recognize the black flag of the so-called Islamic State. One of the worst of these organizations that I've ever seen. I had the opportunity to fight Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and ultimately the Islamic State in the Philippines, I had the chance to go up against the Abu Sayyaf. But this organization was unique, and it's unique not just because of the depredations that it brought upon the people that it subjugated, but it is unique in that it has embraced technology in ways we've never seen an organization like this embrace technology. It is also a threat to the U.S. counties. We call this the 4+1, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and extremist groups. But there's a sixth, and it is transnational organized crime. And as you can see, these arrows go around the world, and these are superhighways for the movement of sex trafficking, guns, money, terrorism, superhighways. But each one of those is also a superhighway of information and data. So we really have 4+1+1, the global criminality on the back of which frequently terrorists move. And what we've discovered today is that with the advent of cyber capabilities, with the advent of something called the cyberspace, the world has become very much a borderless world. America, for generations, was secure behind our oceans and was secure behind our mountains. And when war came to America and when we reluctantly had to take the war to the enemy, we sent our Marines and soldiers and others across the seas. And the Navy would keep the sea lines open for us. And we would fight those wars a long way from the United States. But the nature of the cybersphere today and the cyberspace today means it is a borderless world, and it operates literally at the speed of light. And they can be into your system and gone, regulated by a hostile nation or an advocate group or a surrogate group, and devastate your system and be gone before you know it. It is really, truly a borderless world today in cyberspace. This is where Intel did a great job on this slide. This is what 1 minute of the internet looks like. 1 minute. It's 1.5 gigabytes of information moves in cyberspace every minute. And when you talk about, when you see the enormity of the connectivity in the world today of people with network-capable devices, phones, iPads, notebooks, there's 3.4 or so network-capable devices for every single person on the planet. We can communicate in ways we could never have imagined before. And that's good for education, it's good for medicine, it's good for business. It flattens the world in ways that we all can communicate, but it has also created enormous capacity for those who wish us ill to penetrate our own networks and our own devices and to raise havoc with who we are as a people. So a little bit more on the network and what a minute looks like. This is just some basic statistics from the wheel to the right. Look at that, 150 emails, 150 million emails a minute. This is very interesting, I think. The Apple Store downloads 51,000 per minute. Apple downloads. I'm definitely seeking stuff in this organization. Now, what's interesting, and I'm sorry I don't have two lasers where I can go on both sides. This is a very interesting wedge here. And for the ladies and gentlemen in my rear, it says roughly 28 million WhatsApp chats per minute. Now, I don't know how much you all know about WhatsApp. When I ran the Global Coalition to Counter ISIL, WhatsApp is a real challenge for us. Now, for you and me, it means we can conduct business in a completely secure environment, point-to-point, complete security. Very difficult for an intelligence service to get into that point-to-point relationship unless they get into your phone. But it is also a platform upon which a great deal of terrorist planning and terrorist execution occurs. So we're very attentive to the volume of what occurs in WhatsApp. That's just a minute in the world today. So we are awash in information, and it's good for us. But the 4+1+1, they're taking advantage of the weaknesses in our systems. Korea. I operated against the North Koreans in the mid-aughts. It is a criminal state. It's not a state as we know it. It's not a state that we can even rationalize. It is a criminal state that has subjugated its own people for the purposes of plundering them, ultimately to keep a very small elite in place. One of the reasons that it's able to stay afloat in terms of economic capacity is its cyber criminal activity. And whether they're coming at us as Bureau 121 or Unit 180, or this organization that's called Lazarus, which is, in essence, an advocate and a surrogate group that we think is formed out of the military, but it also has privately contracted hackers. It is not an insignificant number of people constantly attempting to penetrate the network. 6,000 personnel, we think, are operating in North Korea in an organized cyber criminal, cyber terror operation. In the upper right-hand corner of that slide, you can see what the operations are, some of the big ones. And there are many. These are just some of the big ones. Cyber crime, in this case, where they drained a bank in Bangladesh of $81 million. They conduct massive retaliatory strikes, cyber strikes, against those elements in the West that criticize the great leader, or the new leader, whatever Kim Jong-un calls himself today. And I think we have all seen what happened to Sony. Sony was brought to its knees by the cyber attack, which the FBI was ultimately, through forensic analysis, able to tell had a North Korean origin. But this is the one that I worry about a lot, because I think this is only the beginning, and this is the ransomware attack called WannaCry. Now, our colleague from Symantec made some great points a couple of minutes ago. Let me ask anybody to put their hand in the air. In fact, you probably don't want to put your hand in the air. If you got hit by WannaCry, you remember it. WannaCry is a ransomware attack. For those of you who've never been hit by one, looks like this. Your screen comes up, and what's just happened is typically you got an email. It cajoled you, it intrigued you to open an attachment, and when you open the attachment, the malware was downloaded into your system, and this screen comes up, and it tells you that it has taken charge of every file on your computer, and it has encrypted them, and unless you pay a ransom, and by the way, the ransom goes up over time, unless you pay a ransom, you will not get access to those files again, and if you go too long, the files remain locked out forever. Ransomware is a big moneymaker in cyber criminal, but it's also a cyber terrorist act. And frankly, ladies and gentlemen, the difference between the two is a difference without a distinction in many cases. But I think for the purposes of counties, I would ask you to pull your attention down to bullets 4, 5, and 6. So much that happens in terms of health care occurs at the county level in this country, and hospital after hospital, primarily in Europe and in the UK, were locked out because of WannaCry. Operations had to be rescheduled. That might seem normal, but some people can't afford to have an operation be rescheduled. Patients' health records, all of the medications that they took were all locked out. The next bullet down is that the 25% of India's national police systems were frozen by WannaCry. I think we can imagine what would happen at the county level if the county police force or local police forces within the county had their systems frozen out. Because sometimes you can't unleak or you can't unlock WannaCry as fast as you want. And then, of course, 100,000 computers in Chinese universities. You know, an awful lot of what's great about America today is the education that comes from community colleges. It is something we should all be proud about in America. My daughter ended up going to Virginia Tech, but she did her first 2 years in a community college, and it was a wonderful experience for her. The blow up at the community college level, at the county level, could be severe with a concerted ransomware attack that could be delivered by a state actor or a surrogate that's difficult to determine is in fact a state actor. This is North Korea. When we did the analysis on the code, the forensic analysis on the code for WannaCry, the origins were North Korean code, right into the heartland of America. And of course, our old friends, the Iranian cyber army, maybe the largest on the planet. Primarily, the activities associated with the Iranian cyber army occur with the Basij Cyber Council. If you know anything about the Basij, it is a rabid, mad dog organization that suppresses the aspiration for liberty and human rights and rights for women in Iran. It also has the principal cause for cyber operations. we think there could be as many as 150,000 individuals engaged in this process. And a wholly owned subsidiary of the Iranians is the Syrian Electronic Army, which is targeted against Western media who write difficult things about Bashar al-Assad. And then, of course, we have these friends, Chinese Unit 61398. It is one of the most active cyber units in the world. It has been primarily involved in economic cyber crime and the exfiltration of unclassified information from American contractors associated with the Department of Defense. So if you look at the map of America, each one of those red dots is where someone got hit, where we could actually determine that they had been hit by a Chinese cyber intrusion or a Chinese cyber attack. As you can see by the slide, 141 organizations in the world were hit. 115 of them were American, most of them high-tech. And when the Chinese unveiled last year their stealth fighter, no one should be surprised to learn that it looks just like the American F-35. And we can trace it back to the particular attack that occurred. It's so virulent that the United States has actually issued warrants for the arrest of 5 Chinese officials associated with this particular organization. So I'm sort of working my way through the 4+1, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the +1. That's a screenshot off Central Command's unclassified computer system where the cyber caliphate of the so-called Islamic State penetrated into the Central Command. So even the extremist non-state actors have the capacity to penetrate into the American cyber networks. And if they can get inside the cyber command or get inside the cyber network of the Central Command, I think they could get into a lot of other places. And then, of course, the criminality that I discussed early along in the transnational criminal problems. In the world today, if all of the countries in the world constitute 100%, about 80% of the world's cyber crime occurs in 20 countries, with almost a quarter of the world's cyber crime directed against the United States. No surprise, we have the greatest penetration into the internet network. If you see that the cyber minute flows in virtually every country, it flows most broadly and most strongly in the United States. And that's where we are often, it's difficult for us to determine the difference between cyber criminality and cyber terrorism, because the effect might be the same in the end, but the reason for the cyber intrusion or the cyber attack, in fact, was different. So I wanted to try to paint for you one of the challenges that we face in the world today. Because as these individuals become, these countries and these non-state actors become more capable, they're going to attack us more frequently. And the reason is because there aren't buildings blowing up. There aren't bodies in the streets. A lot of Americans don't understand the risk that we currently exist within. Yet the effects of cyber and cyber intrusion and cyber attacks can be enormous. And frankly, this picture makes my blood run cold. His Excellency Vladimir Putin with the Supreme Leader Khamenei of Iran. And we now know, of course, as a direct result of last year's investigations and the continued forensics by our intelligence system, the Russians were deep inside our cyber system, the cyber-based voting system of the United States, deep inside the system. And we're not really sure how long they've been there. I think for those of you who are conscious of cybersecurity, who live in that world, IT specialists, I'm sure many of you are in this room, what we discover is that there are often hundreds of days that pass between the actual penetration into your network and your ability to actually detect that penetration. And that's a real problem. So we know the Russians were, in fact, in the system. Our intelligence community has assessed with high confidence, and the term high confidence for our intelligence community is as great a sense of surety that you're ever going to get on anything. That not only were the Russians in our system, but the Russians were ordered into the system by Vladimir Putin himself. Now, this is an eye chart, and I apologize to you in advance, and I'm going to take it apart for you very quickly. Over here, if you see my laser going up and down, everything to the right of my laser is the information campaign, the systematic strategic information campaign waged by the Russians, over here on this side, everything over here, is the planning of fake news and the echoing of fake news with bots and the echoing of fake news with probably about 1,000 to a 2,000 person troll army that did nothing but comment on people that they believed were online, comment on people they believed to be a threat, and also continued to echo and retweet various information. That's the right-hand side. The left-hand side of the Russian penetration of our system is the covert portion. So if you come down from strategy in the north, and then you go into cyber operations, what you then find is down the lower left-hand corner of this slide, and it's not in the lower left-hand corner because it's unimportant, but in the lower left-hand corner of this slide indicates that part of the intention of the Russian program was to ultimately penetrate to the lowest level of the cyber networks associated with the voting system in the United States. And I don't think I need to tell anyone in this room that that voting system is the platform on which the American democracy finds its purpose and its identity. The Russians know that, and they came for the system last year. So we don't really know how big this is. Patient 0 was in Illinois. In Illinois, they detected aberrations and anomalies in their system that just seemed completely unusual and called in some help to try to do some forensics and diagnostics. But by the time they were able to get some sense that they'd been penetrated, as much as 90,000 records in their voter database had been corrupted or exfiltrated. Now, 39 states we think were penetrated. That's 78%, almost 80% of the U.S. states were penetrated by the Russians to get into our electoral system. The night before the election, 120 electoral officials in the United States had their email systems hacked. And I'm sure everybody in here is okay with that. But I'm telling you, when they hack your stuff, and they have your stuff, and they start dribbling it out, my guess is probably there are business relationships, there's betting on the Redskins. I mean, it's just kind of unusual. But there's all kinds of things that people don't want to have get out. But 120 electoral officials had their email hacked by the Russians the night before the election. So we don't know what the full extent. We don't know how broad this is. We may find that it's more than 39 states. And we hope it's not this. We don't at this point think that the Russians actually manipulated the numbers. There was some theory that early along they attempted to penetrate. They were testing the system to see if they could alter the numbers in the electronic systems. But I think the warning that President Obama gave, plus early detection, they backed off. Because that is a direct attack upon the United States. I could argue that anything they did was a direct attack upon the United States. But this is where we live, ladies and gentlemen. This is where our democracy finds purpose, is the electoral system, and it exists and it lives at the county level. An awesome responsibility for you, frankly. But it's not just any longer the electoral system, because there are aspects of strategic and critical infrastructure that also exists at the lowest levels of government in the United States. And I worry about the healthcare system. I worry about our hospitals. As I said, I was very concerned about our community colleges, although that's probably not critical infrastructure. The term SCADA stands for Sensor Control and Data Acquisition. These are generally autonomous systems that are computer-based that will open or close sluice gates on a dam, that will move a track to keep trains from having head-on collisions, that can dump wastewater into freshwater if it operates at the wrong time. And when you can get into the SCADA systems, you have real capabilities to change schedules, ultimately to create vulnerabilities, and real capability, which is a public safety issue, that we've not seen before. And we know that the Russians penetrated some of our critical infrastructure last year. Again, my sense is, years in doing some of this myself, these are reconnaissance efforts. They don't go where we're strong. They go where we're weak. They go where they think we're not looking. They go where they can test the system and sense that it is undefended. And often if they do, they'll plant beacons into the system that will beacon back to them and let them know that the system remains vulnerable. So from my perspective, if I were doing this, I would be setting the conditions over a long period of time to be able to take advantage of the American critical infrastructure cyber network and our voting capabilities against the day when Russia and the United States has a physical confrontation, and taking down our critical infrastructure is one of the first moves that we detect in the war between the U.S. and Russia. It is not at all far-fetched to believe that we call it preparation of the battle space is underway right now. So we've seen these threats before. Advanced persistent threats where nations, non-state actors, surrogates will focus multiple tools upon what they think might be our weak spots or our vulnerabilities with the idea of achieving some effect or another. A zero-day attack is, of course, where the malware is produced in that particular day. And signature-based cybersecurity, signature-based cyber protection, which relies for its capability on updates, periodic updates, the zero-day attack occurs, if it occurs between the last update and the next update, they're in your system. That's the problem with a zero-day attack. And then we have something called polymorphic attacks. That enormous river of 1 minute of data per minute, per hour, per day, that enormous river of information has produced the capacity for the morphing of malware at a level and a speed that we've never seen before. We think that as many as 100,000 pieces of malware are produced a minute in the world. And if you rely for your security upon a signature-based system that has to be updated as we are able to identify malware, classify it, and then send out protective patches, then we're always going to be behind the power curve. And as this slide indicates, we think it's just beginning. Because it's easy for the enemy to attack us in cyberspace. It's an asymmetric attack. They don't have to go strength upon strength. No one is going to take on the United States of America and be able to survive the physical involvement. But what they have discovered now is that in cyberspace, they have capacity to reach directly into the heartland of America. In so many ways, how you defend yourself at the end point is the way to go. I am not doing a product brief here. I'm telling you the reality of the world. The enemy is using artificial intelligence now in an environment that we call hyperwar. Speeds of action and reaction are so fast that for all intents and purposes, the presence of the human in the loop is in fact a vulnerability and not an asset. This is why polymorphic threats are coming at us so quickly and in so many different ways, across such a broad spectrum of the network. So as we think about the kinds of protection we want on our systems, as we think about what AI is doing to create the kinds of threats that can penetrate so deeply into the heartland of America, we also have to think about what artificial intelligence can do and what is known as a cognitive endpoint protection system. A thinking, learning system that sits outside your network and will stop WannaCry even though it's never seen it before. Will stop the Petya malware, which the Russians used to bring the Ukrainians to their knees 2 weeks ago, without ever having seen it before, because it is a learning, cognitive cybersecurity system. So as my colleague a few minutes ago talked about Symantec's systems, I'm not going to talk about a particular product, but I'm going to tell you that if you're thinking about cybersecurity and you're not thinking about a cognitive-based endpoint protection, and you buy a signature-based protection, you better learn how to use the Bitcoin system. So, ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate your giving me some time today. This was my opportunity, having spent so many years dealing with the enemy, first to come down and pay tribute to you for what you do for America's precious citizens every single day. This is where America is governed. This is what has made our country what it is, what you do every day. When I retired, the enemy was then beyond my reach. When he was within my reach, he didn't like it. But the enemy is beyond my reach now. And I want to thank Linda Langston and Mike Griffin for helping me with Bryan to have the chance to tell you today what an old guy, retired out of the Marine Corps, who looks across this body of leaders to tell you that your Marines are still going to continue fighting for you overseas. We're going to continue to have the greatest Navy on the planet. It'll dominate the waves and keep us safe. But there isn't yet a cyber cavalry unit. There isn't going to be a federal cavalry unit that comes over the hills when your system is hacked and you're taken to your knees, or the data has been exfiltrated on all of your citizens, or public safety has been compromised because they're inside your infrastructure. It just isn't there, and it probably isn't going to come. So part of what my purpose is today is to just appeal to you, because you really are the front line of democracy. And we're under attack. Our democracy is under attack. And I think you all will be the people that defend it. Well, we got folks overseas. You'll defend it at home. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. Thanks very much. I think we may have time for one or two questions. My phone is going crazy here. I get a lot of WhatsApp messages here, so I got to walk out right away and see what people are saying. Yes, ma'am.
So knowing what you know about cyber war, as I think you called it hyper war.
Right.
Not even starting on an individual basis, what can we do at home?
Sure.
Plus work. Do we go back to the old days of the paper technology as you would?
Right.
Do we get out of this internet world and stop with the technology?
No, that's a great question, and there have been folks who've proposed that. What has happened to us because of the Cyber Minute is, for a whole variety of reasons, why we are a nation that is great in so many ways. It has given us the capacity to move, not in a linear sense, towards being a continuously great nation. It has given us, in a geometric or even perhaps exponential capacity, to harness information. We simply can't take a step back from that, because in so much of what we've done to help ourselves, we've also helped the world. And the world is a much better place in many respects because of what we've done with respect to technology. So I think, this is my guess, not a guess, it's actually better informed than that. The county leadership, in close partnership, and many of you are doing this already, most of you are, with your IT structure, but very importantly with your chief security officials, and with security individuals who can help you from the private sector to understand exactly the differences between the various capabilities that you have on your systems today, so that you can continue to layer the kinds of technology that will give you the advantage to secure your system, so that in fact you can take care of your system, your citizens. Lots of folks want to buy an entire suite of capabilities, and I'm not here to make a sales pitch of some kind or another. The kinds of systems that acknowledge the reality of artificial intelligence now being brought to bear to create zero-day capabilities and polymorphic threats, the kinds of systems that acknowledge that artificial intelligence is at work against you, are, I think, where you ought to put your first emphasis. And if signature-based, which is a system which is able to recognize something we already knew about, but may not be able to recognize something that occurred 2 seconds ago, because it was updated 5 minutes ago. Signature base will get you to a point, but you probably want to look at a combination of capabilities. And you do this with your IT leadership, you do this with your security leadership, and you can do this in consultation with organizations and companies that have real expertise in this area. If you do this and you consult right, my guess would be, and people have called upon you for savings, you can actually protect yourself at a pretty good price. It doesn't break the bank, and that's really what's important. This message is all about how we protect each other as opposed to any particular product. So I would simply say it's a generation of protection that we all need to acknowledge has come our way. We need to acknowledge it and see how it can enhance what you already have on the system. We'll take one more. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
We have thousands and thousands of people that are attacking the United States with cybersecurity. And in your last comment, you said that we don't have a cyber cavalry unit and probably won't have one. Is that because we don't have young people who don't want to get into that area, or is there other reasons?
It is at this point an organizational decision that has not been made. What the Department of Homeland Security will do for us is it will help us to understand what the cyber threats are. It will notify us immediately. It's tied in very, very closely to our financial system. I think the sense would be that one of the earliest harbingers of a major, what Leon Panetta, our former Secretary of Defense, used to call the cyber Pearl Harbor that he says is coming. One of the earliest manifestations of that will be the systematic takedown of our financial sector. Happily, many of those companies are at the leading edge of cyber technology, and they're working that very hard. But the United States has not made the decision, and I'm not sure you want the United States to make the decision, to reach right down into your computer networks into the county and have it be tied directly to the federal area. Now, I think warning systems are fine. I think periodic updates on technologies that you should be considering is fine. But what we have where we have made our decisions with respect to the future is organizing a cyber command that gives us the ability to wage strategic cyber warfare if necessary in retribution, or if we have to lead with cyber warfare, that's a global capability. And we have our intelligence community as well that is constantly doing cyber analysis and, frankly, our own cyber reconnaissance. And they're not oriented down. They're not oriented down. The only people coming to help you are you. And I think that's an important outcome of a conversation like this. And when you think about in an ICU, in a hospital, how many devices just in an ICU that rely either on access to Wi-Fi or the internet, and what happens to every patient in the ICU if suddenly the entire network is taken down with a cyber attack. You know, my blood would run cold, actually. So I think the point here is not to sow despair. The point here is we still got time. And an analysis at the county level of the kind of protection that you have today, given the threats that are occurring, and what you might want to invest in over the long term that is scalable, because not all counties are the same. Not all counties have the same amount of assets and resources and infrastructure. That is scalable, but also is teachable. That's the great advantage of a cognitive-based, AI-based cyber protection capability. It is trained constantly. And I will simply tell you that some of the products that are out there, they picked up WannaCry. Never seen it before. But it, as an artificial intelligence-based system, it stopped an unknown, unfamiliar inbound malware, did a DNA-level analysis of the code, had seen some of that code before and didn't let it in. AI cognitive-based systems stopped Petya when the cyber-based, or rather the signature-based systems let it in the Ukraine. And frankly, there's large places in the Ukraine where the power's still out. So it's a borderless world that can strike at the speed of light. And we just got to be ready. And that readiness can occur. But we have to be ready for it. We have to understand that the threat is out there. It's not a threat that's going to come tomorrow. It's a threat that may already be in your system, by the way. So it's worth thinking about, and that was my point today, was to thank you for all that you do every day for our precious citizens, but also to tell you that we're not leaping over mountains or rivers anymore. The enemy's with us. Yes, sir. This will be the last question. Yes, sir.
First of all, General, thank you for your service.
My honor. Thank you.
Given the fact that we might experience this cyber attack, whether it's localized or nationwide, should counties get into the business of being able to respond in the physical world to hospitals going down, to water systems going down, to sewer being dumped into freshwater supplies? Is that another responsibility we need to start thinking about?
Well, I would. And I'm not telling you you've got to respond across the board to those. But disaster response consequence management, which I think our counties have come light years in the last 2 decades, when the time comes to think your way through what would be called black swan scenarios, things that you just can't imagine that could have happened in your county, but the entire network has been taken down in the hospital, going through with the emergency services that scenario, and having people to think about a couple of things. How do you respond? How do you take care of the patients in ICU? Who attempts immediately to restore the network? What are all the things that are necessary in a number of these scenarios in the event of a catastrophic cyber attack where you can restore service as quickly as you possibly can, obviously for public protection and public security of the citizens? And I can imagine tabletop exercises where you go through these scenarios. Very importantly is to get the cyber network back up and then to orchestrate the movement of the first responders in ways that can restore service as quickly as possible or reduce the effect of the cyber attack. I don't know that it requires new capabilities. I would propose that it requires that you think perhaps differently about the capabilities that you have. And then perhaps in the margins of the capabilities you have, what additional you might need in the margins in order to permit you to have capacity to respond across the board to all of these threats. That's probably what you'll find. You own much of it already, but it hasn't necessarily been focused on those particular issues. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time today, and I wish you all the best. God bless you all. Thank you.
All right, everyone. I hope I'm sure you're all awake after that presentation, for sure. I know there's going to be a little bit of moving after this because it's after lunch, but if I could get your attention for just a quick sec, we're going to be moving into our panel on cloud environment software in just a moment. So if we could just simmer down for a second, that'd be great. And without further ado, I apologize. No, our next stop is not all around cloud. I apologize. We're going to be talking about streamlining disaster prevention and response. And for that, we will be joined by, the CEO of Gruntify, whose name was up on my phone, Jamie Leach. I apologize, Jamie. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, what a tough act to try to follow. The General was just amazing, wasn't he? Just awe-inspiring. Is my mic working? Yes, ma'am. Fantastic. Now, for anybody that hasn't quite worked it out, I'm not the one with the accent, okay? I'm Jamie Leach. I'm the CEO of a Brisbane-based technology company that's now also located in Silicon Valley, of course, of all places, Gruntify. And we do a number of things predominantly with governments in Australia, and we're starting to do more with governments in America. But when I was talking to the folks of NACo and PTI about one of the most recent things that we've done for the Queensland government in natural disaster prevention and recovery, they thought it might be a story that might resonate with some of you here. As I understand, America is just as prone to natural disasters as we are in Australia. Whether it's fire, flood, tornadoes, they all have the same sort of challenges that come down to the county and then to the state level. So if it's all right, I just want to take a little bit of time and take you through some of the learnings from the Australian governments and ways that we might be able to help you out here in America. So if I speak too fast or you don't understand, put your hand up and I can repeat in probably more American tones. So there's the big five of natural disaster out there, aren't there? There's hurricanes, there's wildfires or bushfires as we call them, there's tornadoes, there's floods, and then we have cyclones as well. We're upside down under, so we call them cyclones, whereas you call them hurricanes. And I just wanted to touch upon an example of each of the big five. The first one is Hurricane Katrina. Now, it was one of the 5 deadliest events that you have seen here in the US and happened obviously in the Gulf country in 2005. It claimed, sadly, over 1,800 lives, and damage bill came to more than $108 billion, which is just staggering. Now, that figure, I believe, has actually continued to climb as there are still pockets of regions or towns that are still recovering to this day. So obviously one of the most devastating. The next one I'll point to comes from Australia. In 2009, we had a wildfire or bushfire event in Victoria, Australia. And we like to give our events names, and this one was called Black Saturday Fires. The entire event happened in a day, and it tore through a massive region of the state, taking out over 2,000 homes. Whole towns were just levelled. Over 7,500 people were displaced, and the cost, keeping in mind that Australia has a much lower population, was only $4.4 billion. There are still communities that haven't rebuilt to this day. The next one is also in Australia, and this is one of our big cyclones that happened in the last couple of years. In 2011, it was a Category 5 system. So cyclones we grade much like tornadoes from 1 through to 5, 5 being a freight train absolutely bearing down on you. And this event, it takes a couple of days for a cyclone to come in. It sort of teases you a bit like a hurricane. You can see it coming, you're just not sure where it's going to actually hit landfall. It took out numbers of towns. Insurance estimates were over $655 million, but the total cleanup is over $3.5 billion. So that was a massive, widespread event. The cyclone itself was bad enough. It affects a certain region. But then it's mean. It sort of trails down the inland and drops buckets of rain everywhere it goes. And you're pretty much guaranteed of getting widespread flooding for weeks after you get a cyclone. And that's what most people are more afraid of in the long run. So then you've got the Super Outbreak. Does anybody remember that coming through in 2011? So it took out southern, northern, midwestern regions. That thing tore right up the middle of America, didn't it? So you had, it lasted for up to 4 days. So my understanding with tornadoes is the event's usually over fairly quickly in most cases, and you just got to watch for where the next funnel's coming down. So 4 days of vigilance watching tornadoes would have been absolutely horrifying. Claimed 320 lives, sadly. 2,500 people were injured, and the damage bill was more than $11 billion again. So another widespread geography-based event. The last one I'll touch upon is something very close to my heart. I was caught up in the middle of this. This was the southeast Queensland floods, which should have been more aptly named 75% of Queensland and half of New South Wales. So we're talking a massive portion of land was underwater for anywhere up to 2 weeks straight. We saw devastation to infrastructure, roads, bridges, rails. Some of them are still being rebuilt to this very day. It took months to clean up, $8.3 billion in damages and recovery costs so far. That one was absolutely terrifying. So I want to play a bit of a game with you during this session, because who wants to die by PowerPoint, right? So I've got a number of questions I'm going to interlace through this, and we're going to see how awake you are and how much you know about natural disasters in America. They're all American questions, you'll be pleased to know. So there's 6 of them. Now, is Tony in the room? They were going to try to put this on the survey button of the app, but I'm happy to go old school. Has everyone got a pen and paper? Fantastic. You can't go wrong, as to your point earlier. So Which age group represented over half of the total victims of Hurricanes Sandy and Katrina together? I'm just going to give you 5 seconds. This isn't going to be a long, drawn-out process. Is it A, 0 to 5-year-olds, B, 5 to 15-year-olds, C, 21 to 50-year-olds, or D, the over 65 age group? Which one represented over half of all of the victims of the 2 hurricanes? Has everyone got an answer written down? Drum roll. It was the over 65s. And tragically, whilst a number of those drowned in their homes, they suffered from hypothermia, they suffered from injuries sustained. There were actually events, particularly in Hurricane Sandy, I understand, where people literally couldn't get hold of medication or, even worse, starved to death in their homes from not being able to get access to the outside world. In March, I had the privilege of visiting the Office of Emergency Management in New York, and they were explaining that one of the most difficult things they had to deal with was trying to get people on the ground to physically door knock these individuals that were classed as elderly, disabled, or vulnerable, to check, did they have food? Was the heat back on? Could they get access to pharmaceuticals or medications? Something so basic. And trying to coordinate that activity of having these people physically go out and visit was one of the greatest challenges that they experienced. So, if we look at a stakeholder solution, what has the Queensland government really said are the 4 key things that they need before they'll look at adopting any stakeholder solution? Well, we heard earlier in the panel that for a technology to be adopted, and we had Kenneth, the administrator, say he's got a few things on a checklist that he wants, and I was laughing up the back because it sounded like our Premier actually speaking at the time. Number 1, he wants return on investment. It seems so simple, but you don't go out and buy new toys and gadgets just because they're shiny. You want to know that there's a measurable way that you can assess, is that technology going to make a difference in what you're trying to do? You want it to be efficient. You want it to be a somewhat off-the-shelf solution because nobody wants to pay and be on the bleeding edge, as we heard earlier, invest a lot of money in something that's unproven. But it's got to be customisable as well because we've all got slightly different use cases, different needs. So this is not dissimilar to what we heard from the Queensland government every time we've solved a problem for them. The next thing is collaboration. We are getting, through cyber operations, the world is becoming much smaller. So in Australia, it's quite common for a city or a local council, or you call them counties, we call them councils, we've got the British side happening, to often band together and share a piece of technology or share operations depending on the geographical spread. So if you're going to collaborate, you've got to make sure that everyone can get access to the data, everyone can put the data in, and more importantly, everyone can pull the data out. That also changes over if you're looking at departments or agencies that you're dealing with. And the sharing of knowledge, sharing of data, continues to be one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing in Australia between departments, agencies, organisations. And I understand it's not different here in America in a lot of cases. Real time. Everybody wants what they're doing to happen immediately. If you make your mind up, if you want to make a data-driven decision, you need to access all of that information in real time, every time, irrespective of where you are. And lastly, the workflow. We look at workflows. It's not just tasking a contractor to go and repair a road, a bridge, an overpass. It's also asking other people that you deal with internally to look at data, to do their part. So any solution that our government's looking at has to have that multi-level approach of being able to get different people in different roles to do their part in a single piece of technology now. They don't want to have to export it or send it out to other solutions. So it's a challenge. But then we have collaboration. So collaboration is a bit of the buzzword of the time, but it's something that is making a lot of common sense. Collaboration occurs between the municipalities, the counties, the state, the federal, but also internally. How you work with other people in your department, and also if you take it outside and you ask for the community or the public to be able to be giving you information. It all needs to work seamlessly. So collaboration is something that you need to be paying a lot of attention to. So enough lecturing, time for another question. Who got the last one right? Show of hands. Oh, you're all too good. Anybody want to say they got it wrong? Oh, fantastic. So how many disasters attracted losses in excess of $1 billion across the US in 2016? There seems to be a bit of a yardstick measure there where you consider a good disaster to cost the country at least $1 billion. Not sure where that's come from. It's probably changed in recent years, but how many disasters in 2016 had a price tag of in excess of $1 billion? Is it 3, 50, 15, or 9? Just take a second. Come up with your answers. There's a lot of conferring going on around this room. There's some collaboration going on, I'm sensing. Okay, you ready? The answer is 15. In 2016, there was more than 15 weather and natural disaster events costing in excess of $1 billion. There was a drought. There was a wildfire. There were 4 inland flood events. There were 8 severe storm events. And I've got it written as a tropical cyclone. You'd probably call it a hurricane event. But that all totaled up to each one costing more than $1 billion. So another buzzword that we're all talking about is cloud technology. And there seems to be this rush for everyone to adopt everything on the cloud. Why the cloud? Why now? Well, there's a couple of reasons. The first one is we need that data to be easy to access. So cloud gives you mobility in a lot of cases, meaning that it doesn't matter which computer or device you're logging in from, you get that same experience. Cloud also allows you to scale up and down. So as you start one use case on a piece of technology, imagine you could adapt that to 2, 3, 4 different use cases, meaning that there's 2, 3, 4 times the people wanting to use it. You can start to scale up that amount of data that's coming in and out without having to make any changes to the actual back end of the system. And that's one of the flexibilities that cloud technology does grant. The next thing is cross-agency collaboration again, meaning that multiple people all doing the same thing wherever they're located at the exact same time. And that's something that traditional server-based technologies didn't always grant. And of course, and this is one of the mantras for why you take up new technology, you want that increased efficiency and productivity. That just goes without saying, right? So while we're on a roll, of the 1,200 tornadoes, now just before I finish that question, when I landed, somebody at the airport said to me, "Oh, you're in tornado country now." And I immediately started looking up at the sky going, "The sun's out, I'll be right." And the last thing they said is, "You're fine as long as there's not a thunderstorm." So for the last 2 days, every time I hear a clap of thunder, I'm just trying to go under the table. We're just not used to that here in Australia. So of the 1,200 tornado events reported each year in the US, which state has the highest number of events? Now we're going to do a little thing here. The 4 answers are Ohio. Who's here from Ohio? Okay. Answer B is Texas. Is there anyone from Texas in the room? Answer C is Kansas. Anyone from Kansas? And answer D, Oklahoma. Anyone from Oklahoma region? Alrighty. So which one has the most events on an annual basis? You've all got your answer? Who thinks it's Ohio? Who thinks it's Texas? Who thinks it's Kansas? A lot for Kansas. Anyone for Oklahoma? Okay, most of you are wrong. It's actually Texas. Since 2006, they've averaged over 155 twisters a year. And I'm told that that's only what the National Weather Service can vouch for, because of course for a tornado to be recorded, somebody has to actually see it, or they have to be able to pick it on the the Bureau maps, so a lot of them go unreported. But in this case, it's Texas. So guys, if it's all right with you, I just want to share a quick example of where this technology is making real-world differences right now. And that's in Queensland. We had a major cyclone come through in March. I think it was 4 days after I got back from my last US trip. We had what was a Category 5 storm bearing down on the coast. It changed to a Category 4 by the time it crossed the coastline, thankfully. And the Queensland government had recently spent money on a cloud-based technology to deal with such a matter. What they struggled with is the ability to do rapid damage assessment across a massive geographical region. Every time disaster happens in Australia, we have to catalogue the roads, the bridges, the rail, because there's a federally drip-down funding system. Plus, the government needs to know the quickest way to repair it and to get life back on track. So they were looking for a way to do this in the most efficient and productive way. The next thing is the cyclone response needed multiple agencies, governments, not-for-profits, military, all of these people to respond simultaneously, either in responding and rescuing people or in the repatriation and recovery after the event. And of course, the funding process, which I'll explain in a few slides, is really, really long, drawn and convoluted, as all good things are. So the government was looking for a way to speed up that money to trickle down to actually do the repairs as quickly as possible. What I want to show you is a quick video that was produced by our partners Microsoft. They actually flew a team over from Seattle once they heard about the Queensland government using this technology, and they recorded just a quick video that I'll show you, and it's actually got our Deputy Premier and the heads of our Transport and Main Roads departments speaking about their experience.
Queensland is a state that has as its coastline almost 3,000 kilometres, and off the coastline is of course the world icon, the Great Barrier Reef. Queensland is also subtropical, and because of that we are often battered by cyclones, and we also see quite a lot of flooding events post-cyclone. We have had a lot of practice at responding to natural disasters, and one of the things we have gotten better at is how we use technology to respond during a natural disaster. Gruntify has a big role to play in making government far more responsive to people's needs, to rapidly assess damage and then be able to move in and do what is appropriate in terms of a rebuild.
Gruntify is often referred to as Instagram for the government. Effectively, it enables customers to collect data in the field, to manage that data in the cloud. We chose Microsoft Azure technology partly because of the cloud. All of the products are hosted in the Microsoft cloud due to their security and meeting a lot of the government's requirements. And we're also very excited about this suite of Azure artificial intelligence type applications that we continue to put into the technology as it matures.
We went forward with training with the app that was developed by Gruntify, and that app is ready for implementation into the cyclone season. So the event that we worked on this year was Cyclone Debbie. It had winds of up to 260 kilometres an hour and rain of up to a metre in 24 hours. So with the high winds like that, in places where the roads are close, you get a lot of erosion, you get a lot of landslides. What it used to be was people collecting photos on phones, photos on iPads, basically emailing them in, putting them into files, submitting it. You can appreciate just how difficult and unwieldy that became and the amount of data we're trying to transfer. Now, not only are we taking photos, but we've actually got all of the forms and submissions and the way of geocoding that and spatially recognising where it is, what disaster it is, what day it was. And the reality is we're now storing data in a way that it's able to be accessed from wherever. We don't always have telecommunication access in all of our places. So the great thing here is that people can put the data into the system, it's stored on hold, and when you're back into range of telecommunications, it sends it automatically. To do all those sorts of things, to do it in a very simple application is what the elegance of this solution is all about. I've been leading the department's agency's response to disasters now for about 7 years. The response to this time was probably the most organised and ordered that I've been involved with the whole time.
As a government, we have absolutely embraced digital transformation. We know that it's the way of the future, and we know that it's a better way for us to provide Queenslanders with the type of services and responses that they need.
So a couple of interesting facts in that was just the sheer amount of data that had to be collected. And in fact, in the first week after the cyclone hit, there were over 16,000 files and reports that were put into the system almost simultaneously. Now, each one of those reports were up to 53 pages of questions that have to be answered for the federal government to provide the grant money to repair the infrastructure, and would have dozens and dozens of photos cataloguing the event. Now, traditionally, as you heard there, the government would quite often send out individuals in the field. They'd take cameras, they'd have smartphones, they'd have tablets. They'd then either bring it back and upload it, type out a report, or they'd be trying to email it in from where there was low connectivity. What they've found is that each form has been shortened by over 4 hours in the creation and the way it's been shared. And the funding process, compared to previous disasters, has been able to be sped up by almost 18 months. So you're talking billions of dollars flowing through a lot quicker than had happened previously, just by a very simple example of a cloud-based technology. So moving on, who's ready to be tortured with the next question? Has anybody got every answer right? Anyone? No. Oh, she's going. Alrighty, here's a chance for you to get the next one. This one I found interesting. What percentage of natural disasters in the US has some form of flooding attached to it? Now think that out. Has some form of flooding attached? Is it A, 90%, B, 35%, C, 85%, or D, 17%? Which percentage? Has everyone got your answers? The answer is A. Over 90% of all disaster events in the US has some form of flooding attached to it. And according to the National Severe Storm Laboratory, I didn't know there was such a place, but apparently there is, the flooding not only occurs in every US state and territory, basically floods kill more people in the US each year than tornadoes, hurricanes, and severe storms put together. Floods also, by far, in Australia account for the largest damage to infrastructure and to assets. So you can't underestimate the effect of a severe rain event. So what's wrong with traditional emergency response and incident management systems? Well, the first one is the age-old question, what is your location? If anybody has spent time with fire and emergency or police rescue, and you've listened to call centres and they ask the question, what is your location? Roughly 80% of callers struggle to articulate what their location is. If you take that internally and you've got field staff out there trying to collect reports that require them to put in accuracy of where they're standing when they collected that data, you've got to assume that just as many are going to struggle, particularly if you're in a remote regional area or under a time of crisis. So any technology that can take that question of location by automatically geocoding the data that's being collected is immediately going to create efficiencies in the way that your officers are doing their work. The next one is, traditionally, you can't have multiple simultaneous collection points from the public, internal and external stakeholders. We've siloed the way that data is collected. Internal data comes into one catch. External data is usually coming in somewhere else and being vetted. And data from the public, well, we can't trust that, because what if we have malicious inputs of data or traditional prank call as it's now coming in through emails or online? So the ability to not only have all of that data coming into one catchment area, but vetting the authenticity of that data at the same time is another way that you can create efficiency in emergency response and incident management. Lastly, sharing between multi-level government agencies has always made emergency response difficult. So I've been talking to people for the last 2 days about the sharing of data just internally between agencies. And a show of hands, has anybody worked out the exact formula for how health with police, with child protection, all of those agencies all share their data? Has anyone got the secret formula? You're laughing because you're agreeing, aren't you? Well, I'd love to say it's different in Australia. It's a moving feast. They're getting better at it. The biggest issue still seems to have people hiding behind this privacy cloud. Can't share data because of privacy. It's something to think about. And the last one is data-driven decisions with continuous data analytics and locational intelligence. And I'll just share one example of how this can really work. So in Cyclone Debbie, all down the coast of Queensland was awash with high tides, floods, the like. And there were a number of landslides along the Great Barrier Reef main highway where the roads were literally cut off and were going to be cut off for months. And there was this little town, population of about 1,000 people, that had a primary school. The children were bused to just outside of town where the primary school was, and the landslide happened right in the middle between where the houses were and where the school was. Now, normally people would say, well, they can just go to another school. But the nearest school was another 2 hours away on a school bus. When you're talking elementary or primary school children that have gone through massive trauma, the last thing you want to do is put them on a bus for an extra 2 hours each way each day. Within 2 days of the event, the government had received the first reports coming in, had been able to assess what was going on and make a judgment to build a temporary school in that community, because they recognised that the quicker the community could get back to some sense of normality, the easier it would be for them to heal and get over the event. So those children will be in a temporary school for about 18 months while the remainder of the roadworks go through. But they were back in the classroom in less than a week after an event that basically wiped out their town. And the government were really pleased that they could make that decision almost straight away based on the quality of the data that they were receiving in. They had eyes on something that was 1,000 miles to the north of them. It wouldn't have happened previously. The next largest town further up, they actually trucked in demountables. So we have lots of isolated towns and cities, but there are always another one, 4 or 5 hours up the road. So they were fortunate enough to be able to truck in demountables. What do you call them? Portables. Sorry, we have a few differences in in languages. All right, second last question, guys, for everyone who's doing so badly. Between 2006 and 2015, the world suffered from over 6,090 declared natural disasters. How many were declared in the US? So we're talking a bank of 10 years. How many did you have here in the US? Is it 575, 2,375, 98, or 1,233? The collaboration continues. It's fantastic. Is anybody Googling it? Seriously, the amount of phones in people's hands. Alrighty, guys. It was 1,233. Over 10 years, you have had that many natural disasters declared in the US. That is not the number one continent in the world. You're only number 3 behind Asia and Africa. Each year, in 2010, that was your worst year, you had 146 separate natural disasters declared for 1 year. So 2010 must have been a massive one. So I said I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Australian funding process for disaster recovery because I believe it might have some similarities to what some of you have to go through here. Well, our government, our federal government in Canberra, has put together a wonderful grants program that if a natural disaster occurs and the states and the counties and the cities can tick sufficient boxes, then they actually get some money that comes through to help them repair the assets. It's called the Natural Disaster Relief and Recovery Arrangement. And what it requires is 3 things. So the cities, the counties, the state governments must, number one, keep an asset register that is current. It can't be any more than 12 months old. It has to have geospatial data backed up with actual photographic proof of the state of the assets during that 12-month period. So what the Queensland government does now is they pull out a smartphone, they walk out into the middle of a highway, they stand on the white line, and they go, snap, take a photo. That photo is automatically geocoded and enters into the asset register. And then they jump in a car and they drive so far up the road, they get out and they take another photo. Or they use drones, or they have vehicles that have got the cameras mounted on the top, all enters the system the same way, but they have to catalogue their assets on an annual basis in the hope that they never need to use it. And then, of course, a natural disaster comes along, such as Cyclone Debbie, and it wipes out all the assets in the infrastructure. Second box they have to tick then is the collection of proof of the damage that has occurred. But they need to provide that in a report side by side with what the road looked like before and what the road looks like now, all of which has to be geocoded, and that's where the 53 pages of grant submission comes into play. So there's a lot of things that have to happen. And once again, the state government has employed the 73 local councils, a number of large cities, some third-party contractors, and in some cases the military, have all got the same applications on their phone, meaning that it's not just one department running all up and down Queensland. They all walk outside, stand at their asset, snap a photo, and it goes, oh, somebody was standing here 9 months ago. This is what it looked like 9 months ago. This is what it looks like now. So the process starts immediately. And then the last thing is, after it's repatriated and the government has handed you the money, they just want proof that you actually spent it on the road and not putting it into another government department or wasting it. So they expect a follow-up photo to say, this is how the road now looks. It's a very, very long, drawn-out process, but unfortunately the burden of proof is what keeps the process going. This is the system that, using cloud-based technology, is cut down by more than 18 months and more than 4 hours per individual report. So it's a massive difference that they're experiencing. And the last question, has anybody not got a single question right? Oh, I saw that. Okay, this is an easy one. In which year did the US suffer from more floods than any other single year on record? Which year? I wasn't around for two of these, so we've got A being 2008, B being 1956, C 2016, or D 1913. Which year had more floods than any other single year on record? Do you remember what I said about last year having 4 inland floods that recorded over $1 billion? That's because 2016 was your worst year on history ever. There were over 19 separate flood events recorded in America, which is just massive. Was anybody, the counties, were you caught up in any of those flood events? Yeah? A few? Guys, I just want to leave you with a quick vision of how the cloud-based technology that the Queensland government's employed actually looks and feels. On the right, you've got step one, a mobile device. Any iOS, Android device, no specific hardware needed. That was their number one concern. They didn't want to have to go out and buy special pads or computers or cameras. They just wanted to be able to use what they already had. Data's collected. It then enters the back end, which is browser-based through the cloud, meaning anybody that has access to a computer can immediately start seeing, accessing, and working on the data. And then finally, through the use of maps for spatial analytics, data analytics, they can not only use it to respond to, but they can use it to future plan going forward. And the other thing that the Queensland government demanded was this system had to have two-way APIs, meaning data can be sucked into the front. They also needed to seamlessly export the data out. So that's the case study of what we're doing over there. I'm not suggesting we've got it 100% right, but we're starting to see some massive improvements to a country that gets pummeled every year, it's making a real difference to the citizens. So thank you all very much for hearing about Australia. Did anyone have any questions? Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes. The email address, if anybody would like to know it, is Jamie, Jamie. I was named after the Bionic Woman, so that's showing you my age. Period, because we call it full stop in Australia. I say that and everyone goes, and it's like, no, period, mark, yep. Leach, Leach, at Gruntify, gruntify.com. Now, we're starting to do some trials with a number of counties around America in conjunction with NACo and PTI. So if there are any counties that are interested in learning more about this technology and want to be part of an obligation-free trial, I'd love to have a chat to you at the back of the room. Thank you.
How about another round of applause for Jamie Leach? I thought that was really wonderful. Yeah, it's amazing how many things are going on in the emergency or response and public safety world when it comes to utilizing, harnessing data and technology to move it to the next step. And I think that's all going to be amplified and really rapidly gaining pace when as FirstNet comes online and some of the state decisions are made later this year. So putting that aside, we're going to keep going in the direction of new technologies and things that are rapidly changing. And a few years ago, this subject was a little bit of a brand new subject. Now the mass adoption of cloud has kind of taken over the federal, state, and local public sector workforce and how we arrange what we do and creating more sharing and more opportunities. For that, we're bringing up some leaders from both Amazon and Cloudistics. We have Michael Jackson, who's the healthcare strategy lead, worldwide public sector from Amazon Web Services. And I'm going to have to apologize because I do not have the name for our Cloudistics representative on me right now. So I will let him introduce himself. Are we doing one at a time? Okay. So I will let Michael come up first and give his presentation. Here we go. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hello. So the title of my presentation is Innovation at the Speed of Thought. Your county is a startup. So how many people think that those two things are like diametrically opposed, the county or the government and innovation? They're not. They shouldn't have to be, at least. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to dive right into it because I have quite a few things that I want to touch on. Just so that we're starting from the same point of reference, I would like for us to think about innovation. What are some of the innovations that come to mind, some of the big mind-changing, world-changing innovations that have occurred over the past generation or so? Anybody? No? All right, so when I think of innovation, I would like us to consider this. Innovations are really a representation of our expectations. They really do reflect what we expect. So, for example, in order for something to be considered an innovation, it would have to far exceed what we already experience or what we expect to experience, right? And then experiences are conditioned by experience. Innovations are a result of the evolving expectations, and expectations are a matter of being reflective of our experiences. So let me talk a little bit about experiences, and then we're going to get into how some innovations can be sort of stopped short before they even see the light of day, particularly in state and county governments across the country. When I was growing up, I was a big, big fan of TV. So let's think about acquiring a TV or purchasing anything these days. When we talk about buying a new TV, for example, there was a time when we'd come home all excited and you'd say, honey, I got us a new color TV, right? You had to specify it was a color TV. Years after that, it was a flat TV or an HD TV. Now it's a smart TV, right? Think about the descriptor, the expectations. We get to a point where it's like, okay, I just got us a TV. Maybe a year from now, we'll just assume it's going to be color, it's going to be flat, it's going to be HD, and they're all going to be smart. The same goes for digital cameras. Nobody says I bought a digital camera or I bought a smartphone. It's expectations, right? You expect it to be a flat, smart phone. In fact, the expectation would be kind of crazy if it weren't. So that's what I mean. Innovations are reflective of our expectations, and expectations are conditioned by our experiences. So experiences are typically made up of three components. There's engagement. How do you interact with the citizens or the customers that you're looking to serve? Efficiency on the back end within your agency. We're going to touch on that for a little bit. And then finally, effectiveness, or more specifically, measuring the effectiveness of the first two buckets. So a couple people may ask, well, what the heck is Amazon doing at a conference like this talking about experiences for government, for counties? Before I jump into that, let me ask, is there anybody in the room who was fortunate enough, or I was fortunate enough to have had you join me yesterday for the Fulfillment Center tour, the Amazon Fulfillment Center tour? Okay, so quite a few of you do understand how innovation can permeate throughout an organization. We saw lots of innovations yesterday in that Fulfillment Center, right? So I'm going to tell you the story about why Amazon is here today and how the technologies that led to realizing innovations in that Fulfillment Center ultimately led to me standing on the stage here at NACo. So Amazon.com is just over 20 years old. And about 10 years into that history, 11 years or so ago, we brought to market our first service, or Amazon Web Services. But the decade prior to that, we realized we had a very unique situation. The markets that we served were growing, becoming more diverse. The trends in our needs to serve that market were very unique, very demanding. So we needed an infrastructure that was agile and elastic and secure, allowed us to deploy globally very quickly. And we searched and we searched and we searched. We couldn't really find it. So 10 years in, we realized we had actually developed a core competency that other organizations around the world could likely benefit from. So in 2006, Amazon Web Services was born. Now you may say, okay, well, what's a service, Amazon Web Services? So first of all, let me level set by saying we define cloud computing as the on-demand delivery of IT resources delivered through the internet where you pay as you go, right? So that's cloud computing. Now, let's go back to the previous question, which is how can we take this core competency of cloud computing, because it wasn't even called that back then, how can we take that and find value, lend it to the innovators outside of Amazon? So the first service that we found was very useful was storage. It's probably something we all do today, but back then it was really innovative. The ability to take your files and your data and securely store them in the cloud. Our first service was called S3. Stands for Simple Storage Service, S3. Well, fast forward now, 10 years later, we've got 2,913 services available. So not only has the number of services grown, and by services I mean things that you can do with the data once it's in the cloud, whether it's analytics or computations or artificial intelligence or machine learning or visualization. I mean, you're not going to expect me to stand here and go through 2,913 of these things, right? But what I'm not just trying to emphasize is the number of services, but the pace of innovation continues to grow exponentially as we release more and more opportunities for you to find insights within that data and leverage more and more of these services. So Amazon Web Services, as it became known, was the fastest growing IT company or fastest growing IT vendor in the history of the market. Currently, we have an annual run rate of $15 billion, and it was the first IT company to reach $10 billion year over year, or $10 billion annually in sales. I say that just to add a hint of credibility, because what really brought us to that point was the customer obsession. The fact that we obsess over how we serve customers, and that same obsession should be baked into the way counties innovate, the way anybody or any organization looks to bring an idea from just a thought to fruition. So one thing that we found is that the cloud really is the great equalizer. It democratizes ideas, it democratizes data, and no longer do you need to be a Fortune 500 company to have the resources available to you to do some of the things that a Fortune 500 company has done. No longer do you need to be the federal government, who, by the way, trusts the AWS cloud, agencies such as the intelligence community, to FDA, to HHS. Yes, sir.
So I guess I'm struggling with, about an hour ago, we heard from a 4-star general about the dangers of cybersecurity.
Yes, sir.
And now we're out in the cloud, which would seem to me to make information more vulnerable to cyber attacks.
That is a great point. And you know what? He was an awesome speaker. And I thought to myself as I was sitting in that chair, how am I going to follow that guy? He was... No, he was... Right. That was an awesome point. And I promise you, I'm going to touch on that. I'm going to address that. In fact, why don't I pause and touch on it just a little bit right now? So Amazon Web Services takes security extremely seriously. In fact, it's right up there next to customer obsession. Those are the two things that we do not falter on across Amazon Web Services and throughout Amazon.com specifically. All right? I would say this, when you think about the resources of your county or any enterprise or any organization, when you have an on-premise data center, you employ certain physical security measures, right? Amazon employs those same security measures for our data centers around the world. That's the lowest common denominator. But beyond that, Amazon has resources, thousands and thousands of employees that are scaled and ready to protect and secure, respectively, retroactively, and looking forward for any future potential attacks. We have the scale of security expertise that very few, I pause, I almost said no, but I would say very, very few, any other organization could lend specifically only to security. Privacy and security are our topmost, and again, I'm going to have some more slides later in this to address that specifically. But what I'm trying to say when I talk about the democratization of resources, a startup like Lyft was once a startup, Netflix, Airbnb, Pinterest, Yelp, all of these startups that we think of that were innovative, doing things totally outside of the box, all of which, by the way, are on Amazon Web Services. But when they were startups, they needed to protect and ensure the privacy and security of everyone who used that platform. And by turning to Amazon Web Services, an organization that has the scale of thousands and thousands of employees dedicated just to security, in addition to all of the physical security measures that you would expect, it democratized the ability for a little startup or a little county to employ measures that are employed by the greatest of companies, such as GE, another Amazon Web Services customer, or the FDA, or the NSA, or HHS, Health and Human Services agencies. It's the democratization of resources. So we're going to get more on security, but I think that's a great point. I appreciate you for raising that up, because I don't want that to be, the elephant in the room for the next 20 minutes until I get to that slide. We take it extremely seriously. Customer obsession and privacy and security. Did I answer your question? Yes. Great. So what we're looking at now is the secret sauce. The secret sauce to the success of Amazon.com, Amazon Web Services, and every Amazon business. And it's also the success of the cloud that's employed in all these agencies and startups and enterprises around the world. So think about it this way. If we start from the center with growth, if growth is your goal, and growth can be measured a number of ways, whether you're a commercial enterprise or a private sector agency, and I'm going to get into some of the different motivating factors between the two in a minute. But if your goal is growth, you can start that perpetual growth by lowering your cost structure. Essentially, that allows you to refocus. If your cost structure is lower, you can afford to deploy your resources on the events or on the things that matter most to your organization. Your resources could be developers, it could be your IT department, it could be finances. But if the cloud is being taken care of by Amazon Web Services, then you can afford to shift and allocate your resources to the things that differentiate your mission or your county or your organization. So if growth is the goal, a lower cost structure in the commercial world would allow for lower prices, which improves the customer experience, which brings more traffic to the site. More traffic is going to attract more sellers because a seller is going to say, hey, you guys have a lot of traffic. I want to sell my goods on your site. So that brings more sellers. The more sellers that come allows us to scale, which lowers the cost structure even more, and it becomes a perpetual cycle. But you don't have to take my word for it. Since Amazon Web Services began 11 years ago, we have actually implemented over, well, let me ask you, the last speaker did a great job of engaging you guys with questions, so I'm going to ask you. How many times do you think we raised our prices in the past 11 years? 1, 10, or 12? 1. Somebody said 1? Okay. No, actually, we've never lowered our prices. That was a trick question. I'm sorry, we've never raised our prices. We've never raised our prices. We've actually lowered our prices over 60 times in the past 11 years. So again, you can see how this perpetual cycle just feeds itself, right? So that's on the commercial side. Because on the commercial side, we all know that if you don't take care of your customer, somebody else will, right? Somebody else will. So that goes back to our expectations. How about, I don't know about you, but I'm a very impatient guy. If I go to a website and it doesn't load in 3-4 seconds, I'm out of there. I tap a couple times, and if it doesn't work, I'm out of there. There are too many other alternatives, too many other options of companies that are willing to serve me, right? I'm out of there. And that attitude permeates throughout the commercial sector. Public sector isn't quite the same way. Because if you can't find what you're looking for, you may say you're out of there, but there's nobody else to serve you, right? So where are you going to go? So in some ways, that is the realization that sometimes stifles innovation throughout the public sector. Not intentionally. I mean, your budgets are finite, and you've got big missions to carry out, right? But then you say, okay, if this person wants to renew their insurance or whatever the case may be, they don't have a choice. So what do? Do we invest in all these innovations, or do we just carry out our mission? Well, I'm here to say it doesn't have to be either or. I like to use the DMV as an example. How many people have gone to the DMV and stood in this line forever? I mean, forever, right? And then you finally get up to the front counter. You hand him or her, the young lady or young man behind the counter, a clipboard of all the information that you filled out for the last 20 minutes while you're in line. He or she takes that clipboard, puts it next to their computer or their keyboard, and types in exactly what you typed while you were standing in line. That's really how it works. So I'm going to pick up the pace here a little bit. just a little bit. All right, just a little bit. So I'll tell you that I'm going to pick up the pace a lot. All right, so think about it this way: if on the commercial side, if you don't take care of your customer, someone else will. That's what motivates them to innovate. That's what motivates them to maintain a competitive edge. In the public sector, you know what that motivation is? It's the cost of not doing anything. And this is what I mean. If an individual, rather than standing in line for 20 minutes or 2 hours, can self-serve, if he or she can get what he needs online, the cost to the agency is about 20 cents. Let's say they can't find what they're looking for online. And after a couple clicks, they say, I'm out of here. What do? You pick up the telephone. Doot, doot, doot. Please listen carefully. The menus have changed. Press 1 for this, press 2 for that. Now the cost to the agency goes up to about $4 to $7. And the costs continue to go up until you find yourself standing in line where the agency is paying $14 on average per transaction for the privilege of frustrating the people that they're willing to serve. So the motivation to innovate and to change is what we really need to focus on. All right, I'm going to pick the pace up really fast because I've got a long line of people waiting for me. I thought I had 20 minutes, but... The general session's at 3, Ah. Okay. Who took my time? Where's the general? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. Yes. All right. So we're gonna pick it up a little bit. Why don't I start with this picture? This is something that I'd like us to think about, because if I don't nail home anything today, I want you to think about how all this stuff really hits home to the people that you serve. Right? I could talk about our 2,000 services. I could talk about the innovations and the incubation from idea to realizing it. But what's really important to all of us is the citizenry that we serve. What you're looking at is a homeless encampment under a bridge. And I'm going to talk really fast. I like to pause for effect, but I'm going to talk really fast. What you're looking at is a homeless encampment under a bridge. And I took this picture. You might think it was in some, really big metropolitan area. It's actually in Johnson County, Iowa City, Iowa, 2 blocks away from the health department. They gave me permission to use this photo. The reason I was there is because of the Data-Driven Justice Initiative. You guys familiar with that? It's a program that came out of the White House about a year ago. The purpose is to leverage data to understand and reduce recidivism. Well, that program is run on AWS. They wanted to look at jail data, identify people who are going in and out of jail, right? Break that cycle of 25 days. It costs the country billions of dollars per year. How can we do that? Well, as we got into that project, we realized that it wasn't just in jail, out of jail, but there were multiple stops along that cycle. These individuals would often find themselves battling with bouts of homelessness, mental illness, substance abuse, unemployment. The list goes on and on. Emergency room visits. The problem is each one of those treatments or interactions were handled and managed by very disparate systems, very disparate programs that didn't talk to each other. So what we found is not only was this just a justice and public safety problem, it was a health and human services problem. It was a problem, whether the main problem in your county is opioid addiction or homelessness or unemployment or mental illness, this program really encapsulated it all. So what we did is we brought data from these very disparate systems on AWS, and results range, but they're all very positive, from Miami-Dade County in Florida, Middle Essex, Massachusetts, Johnson County, Iowa. Across the country now, we have over 160 jurisdictions that are leveraging data to not only reduce recidivism, but improve social and health outcomes as well. All right.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Time got short, but we still have cloudistics to come, and then we have
That's true. Okay. So this is for the gentleman who asked about security. These are all the security requirements that we satisfy. We are definitely architected specifically for security. So I'll leave you with the thought that cloud is definitely the new normal. All right? Thank you all.
Okay, sorry to cut that a little bit, but we have to move on. We have cloudistics up next with Andy Rollinger. Well, for him. Sorry.
How's everybody doing today? I am one of the sales leaders at Cloudistics. And the good news is I think I can tell you guys what we do and why it would be interesting for you guys to understand more about us in about 5 minutes. So one of the good things about having Michael go before me is one of the functions of our story actually goes back to the AWS story. So when he said that a lot of the startups were getting, these enterprise level experiences by leveraging a large pool that they were kind of distributing to all these companies, our founders actually were one of those groups. So they founded a company called Aperture, and a lot of the development and everything, because they needed the agility, was actually done in AWS. So they were one of those companies that was actually sold to Dell Software Group in 2012. They still use it today. It was a very successful product. But it made them stop and think about the same things that AWS was thinking, right? Which is, why is it so difficult to stand up infrastructure? Why does it take so long to architect these things, et cetera, et cetera? And there's got to be a better way. And frankly, Amazon Web Services is a shining example of that, right? You can go in, you can deploy quickly, you can understand what you have out there, and they continue to expand that. So our mission was to do effectively the same thing, but in an on-prem situation. And so what we offer is a private cloud that, in a nutshell, you can procure our hardware, install it in 30 minutes, and I can run you through the entire install process. You literally give it an IP range, and then you go into a cloud connector, which is actually web-based, and ironically, it sits in AWS, and you register that IP range to that cloud controller. What that cloud controller does is manages the entire stack. So all of the hardware, software, up patches, everything having to do with the entire stack is now managed from one pane of glass, right? And so I could throw 40 slides up there on why that's so amazing, and I could also tell you all the architecture behind how we do it and everything else. But at the end of the day, and in the interest of time at this point, I think you guys would all understand why, being able to install that quickly and get off the ground, and still keeping your infrastructure on-prem, there's a lot of benefits right there, just inherent of that statement, right? And so we also feel that whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, everything will end up in the cloud, even though seemingly if you would have asked me that 10 years ago, I would have said that's impossible. So we are moving down that curve of impossible. Okay, how do we make it work? What are the benefits? What are the reasons? So we feel like we'll be a part of that future, because at the end of the day, there's no way that everything can go to the cloud, right? And so having that same management structure, the same agility, and so a little bit of the specifics, when you go to architect our solution, again, I can explain it in soup to nuts. It's how much storage do you need, how much of a liquid pool of compute, and how much RAM, and that's it. You're done architecting the solution. Multiple sites are supported, et cetera, and there's a ton of other enterprise features. And do we have the one slide that the slideshow that we have? I'd like to just show you guys one slide just to sum it all up so that you guys can, you don't have it? Okay. But yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, like I say, I did gain a pretty massive advantage of going behind AWS, because I think the story's the same everywhere. Everybody's looking to do the same thing. Get more with less money, or get more with the same money, more performance, no problem. And that's pretty much the gist of the solution, right? Does anybody have any questions?
So why go with something like that when you should go directly to the cloud? What would be the business technology reasons to implement that versus just going straight to AWS? And does it introduce some security vulnerabilities going on-prem like that?
So I think that the answer to the question, which is basically what's the benefit of leaving it on-prem when you could just go to the cloud, that's a question that comes up. It's very specific to business units and use cases. I can't tell you specifically what it is. I can give you some, basically it's comfort at the end of the day, right? There are plenty of organizations that are not ready to go to the cloud, but they want the benefits. There's some other specific reasons, but again, you're kind of jumping down a rat hole. At the end of the day, that's what we offer. We give you the ability to keep it on-prem for whatever reason that you guys would want to. As far as the security risks, we only manage and administrate from our cloud controller that sits in AWS today. You can also have that on-prem if you'd like, and it would sit on a separate server within the same network. But at the end of the day, there's no security risks outside of what a normal data center would be today, right? At the end of the day, we all say that, the cloud's growing and everything else, but, still by and large, data centers are still running, and that's still the bulk of where all the workloads are today. So we're sort of a healthy transition. We give you the benefits of the agility, that sort of thing. So if you wanted to, for example, add more, you plug it in, it recognizes in the controller, and you're off to the races, and you can distribute those resources, right? So that's how an upgrade works. So that sort of level of simplicity and agility is really what we're going for. So, who is using it today? We have 25 customers. Some of them are, they're all actually in the Fortune 1000 space. It hits heavier the larger the company gets, or the more important the business need is. So specifically, I'm not sure if I can really say, but there's some federal integrators that use our product. There's several law, in the law vertical, right, some law firms and some things like that, but I don't want to get too specific because, frankly, I don't know whether or not we're supposed to be advertising that. But we are a startup, right? So, you know, again, in the essence of reality here, we went to market about 18 months ago. So we're growing very quickly. We're having a lot of success, but still a very, very small company.
How do we find you online?
Cloudistics.com. Cloudistics.com.
Where are you based?
We are headquartered in Reston, Virginia, which is outside of D.C.
How are you handling the storage piece? Since storage is such a big deal with video storage, and you can scale back and forth to the cloud on the storage?
We do have some integration to scale into the cloud to have connectivity there for additional storage. And then storage itself, we have stripped out a lot of the operating systems necessary to do storage on an enterprise scale. So we've cut the cost down dramatically. Okay. No. I appreciate your time. Thanks, everybody.
All right, so we are going to wrap this up with our last panel here, talking about protecting sensitive data and the automation of cybersecurity. We've got three great panelists coming up. We've got Steve Hurst, Director of Security Services and Strategy for AT&T. We have Thomas Mcclellan, Director of Policy and Government Affairs for Symantec, and Susan McGee, CEO of Bandura Systems. So if everyone can come on up now, we can grab a seat, and I think now I can have a seat if there's a handheld that I can use. That would be awesome. Well, I'll start by standing. How about that? So you all have been listening all day. We've talked a lot about the big, scary numbers when it comes to cybersecurity. So I'd like to kind of turn this over to you all a bit, since we have delved into this a little bit already, and kind of talk about a few different items and see if we can kind of allow you all to ask our panel of experts here as much as possible. How many of you all have had some sort of breach or incident at the local level? Okay, so I'm not going to call you all liars.
Question?
But
how many people don't know you've been breached?
There you go. So that's the thing. I think most people, if you haven't been breached, it might be also that you are unaware of certain things that may have happened in your network. It's very rare that there's a system that has not been breached. As someone who used to work for the National Association of State CIOs, how many, just you all are experts, how many systems have you all come in to do an assessment of that haven't had some sort of chicanery happen?
I'd say there's always something.
There's always something.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like falling off a motorcycle. If you've done it, you've done it. If you haven't done it, you're going to. And if you did it once, you're going to do it again.
We did like a proof of concept for an agency several months ago. Where we popped a box on and just kind of passively watched what took place. And when we gave them the DLP, the data loss prevention report afterward, and I wasn't in the meeting, so I heard this secondhand. The person in charge, and I won't say who or where they're from, called a sheriff over, and the sheriff locked the door and made us delete everything and sign a NDA. The company signed an NDA because it was so bad.
Wow. Well, you know, I think breaches, whether they've happened already or haven't happened, the idea of these things can often be overwhelming. How many of you felt overwhelmed by General Allen's very frightening asymmetric warfare conversation. I saw at least 3 or 4 hands go up. Again, I don't want to call the rest of you liars, but I'm just saying there's no way to feel comfortable and just, go, unless you're drinking beer for, coping reasons, it's not, it was a little bit of a downer, let's put it that way. What are some of the steps they can take just to kind of start moving things forward? The basic things that you would say, here's a place to start.
I'll start this one off. It's really pretty easy. Security and business continuity disaster recovery are two sides of the same coin. So the first thing you need to look at is your recovery efforts, especially around malware, any kind of malware, any kind of ransomware, any kind of destructionware. You need to be able to restore quickly, and it's really no different than a natural disaster. And being able to get that systems up and running quickly, which means you have to have not only the backups, but you need to be testing the backups to make sure you have a restorable backup. The second thing that I focus on is microsegmentation, and to really take your LAN environment, take your wide area network environment, and segment it off into the smallest pieces possible, and then protect each piece. What that does is it limits the ability for malware like Petya that has a worm embedded in it to spread throughout your entire environment. But everything else is really keeping doing the basics and following the KISS principle.
So I'll say 2 things. And so your question was about where to get started. So the first is really simple, and I'm sure you all know what NIST is. Yes, the NIST framework. Who doesn't know what NIST is? Okay, so National Institute of Standards and Technologies has developed a cybersecurity framework which really looks at the whole ecosystem. And so you have to make sure that your county, the people who are doing it, are norming your systems to NIST. And it looks at the whole, Steve talked about some of the components of it, whether it's, respond, recover, detect, all that. There's a series of different kind of phases that you can look at, and you can do an assessment. And our company Symantec, we do a free assessment of where folks fit on that. It's a good way to govern. A lot of companies do it, so it's not really just a pitch for Symantec. It's a pitch to do it. The second thing is we just commissioned a report through GovTech looking at what is the confidence of different policymakers at the state and county level, on different components of information assurance and so forth. And what was kind of surprising is that in one of these things was, how confident are you that your organization can protect and manage information flow coming? We haven't released it yet. And about 75% felt either confident or very confident. And I take issue with that, because when you look at what the threat environment really looks like, you got bad guys trying to get into your system, and they'll get into your system if they want. And so my second recommendation is be incredibly pessimistic about your abilities to defend. And so don't be so overconfident. And if someone's telling you that we can never be hacked or we haven't been hacked, they're lying to you. I mean, I hate to say it, I don't want to lie to them either, Mitch. But so those are my 2 things: NIST and don't be so overconfident.
And I would say not necessarily NIST, but you need a framework to follow. NIST is a great one. ISO is a good one. PCI is a good one. HIPAA is a good one. There must be half a dozen of them out there.
Yeah. And
so I would say, for most of you, maybe you've got not such large networks unless you're maybe statewide and incorporating a lot of the first responders, et cetera. But what's happened over time, especially now with the Internet of Things, is that the threat landscape has increased exponentially. So we've gone from having a firewall be able to do 100,000 to 300,000 maybe IP threats. So they identify these bad IP addresses. Think of it now, tens of millions of identified IP addresses, like your refrigerator and your thermostat, are now able to be harnessed to attack your network. So I want to build on what Steve said. It's a pessimistic situation. There's no way. I mean, you can say, oh yeah, we're all covered, we got a firewall. There's just no way. So now you need to think about, how do I engage with the internet, and then only be open to that which you need to do for your business. So you're going to reduce the attack space. and take back control with a little smaller window to or door to the internet, both coming into your network and where you're going on the outside. So you want to just take that whole big attack space and quickly reduce it. And a good way to do that is to use threat intelligence, and we happen to be a partner of Symantec. They got great threat intelligence, so anyway. We use their threat intelligence. Yeah,
So
there you
can
go.
I ask a quick question? How many people in the room are commissioners?
Yeah.
Okay, we've been talking technology here. Right. Let's take it to your world.
How many people?
Let's look at risk.
Ask them how many have had a briefing by their CIO about the risks that they face.
Okay, that's
step one.
Let's look at risk, because it really, you can talk IPs, we can talk any number of things, but it really comes down to risk. It comes down to identifying your vulnerabilities, figuring out what the impact is going to be if that vulnerability is exploited, and then what's the impact to the organization. And what you want to do, because you don't have unlimited funds, is to take your highest risk items and to put your focus on those highest risk items, the same as you would any other piece of your infrastructure.
But I think what was about to be said by Thomas there was step one: talk to your CISO or NCIO, right? Was that where you're?
Yeah. So I worked many years with the National Governors Association, and I launched all of NGA's work, and I know we're talking states, counties, but I launched all the work on cybersecurity, and cyber was never an IT issue. Cyber is a business process issue, and that requires leadership, and protection from the elected officials. And if you don't know what threats that you face, if you don't know, for example, that you're being attacked by Russia or Korea or something else, you have to know, because it's going to be your agenda. It's going to be you on the voters block. It's going to be you allocating the resources.
But let's be real. You're not going to know if you're being attacked by North Korea or Russia or anyone else. You're just going to know that you're being attacked.
So let's go there real quick, and I do want to let's call on some audience members first, sir.
Based on the question that you asked, I think there's one thing that you kind of talked around but you didn't hit, and I agree with everything that you said that you have to do. But one of the biggest gaps is that we are not looking at our log information, and we just totally forget audit and all those other capabilities. And you're absolutely right. And sometimes it's because the leadership does not put the attention that needs to be on that. So I just wanted to amplify.
Where are you from, by the way?
PTI.
Okay.
If you look at audit is a critical component. It's a validation method. But if you don't do an audit, let's just say that the county gets a PCI, gets a credit card breach. Once you've been breached, okay,
I'm not talking about a one-time.
No,
the process of auditing stuff, looking at stuff.
The process of auditing has to be done on a regular, reoccurring basis. PCI has a requirement, as do some other frameworks, of regular, reoccurring observation and analysis of the data that's crossing the network, of the attack vectors. Big area for automation. Symantec has products. There are other companies that have products that do automated correlated analysis. And that becomes an element of automation that you need to make use of. That's also where you're going to see a lot of artificial intelligence start to come in.
Yeah, so let's pull that thread a little bit, because I think, we have some folks who are very technically adept here, and then some folks who probably, this is not, once we get into some of the more nuts and bolts. Well, I'm not sure if necessarily deciding whether to do automated or signature is something that most council members know about. So just kind of, let's talk big picture technology. We have 3 firms on stage here who have brought up threat intelligence, assessments, automation. We heard signature versus automation from the general. When you're a commissioner, how do you think about all these technologies in such a changing field so quickly? How would you tell them to be thinking about these things? Because what worked yesterday is old news a month and a half later.
I'm just going to go back to the same thing. But, we make products that are easy to use. They sit in front of a firewall, and you don't have to think as much about it. It will tell you if you're being attacked by Russia. It gives you nice reports, and it says, nice pictures, pie charts. So 25% is coming from Russia, China, we're blocking it, et cetera, but also gives you the ability very quickly to reduce that attack space. So the problem is it's such a big, complicated problem. It is about risk. You just don't want to be exposed to all of that risk out there. So how do you quickly just cut that risk? There's ways to do that now, and I would say that that is a really fantastic first step. And then you've got all the deeper things that can be done, but on a much smaller amount of data that's now going through your firewall, for instance. So I still think
I fundamentally disagree. The first thing you need to do is to do a risk assessment. It's part of operations. It's being able to identify where your gaps are. It doesn't matter whether it's a physical risk or a logical risk. You need to know where your gaps are. Then you know where you can then cover. Threat intelligence is wonderful. However, it's not something you want to rely 100% on. As is, a firewall is you're not going to want to rely 100% on having that block everything coming into your into the environment.
Can I ask a more foundational question? And so we're talking a lot of kind of nuances, and I want to be mindful of the audience of who we've got here. We've got the leadership of the counties here. Does everybody here understand the terminology of cybersecurity? Do you understand the concepts? And at some level, as a foundational step for you in elected office, and understand the machinations of government and the information for which you are responsible for, and it's a great responsibility, is just to understand some of the basics of just the kind of the process. Yeah. What is a risk assessment? What does it mean? What is threat intelligence? What does it mean? What is an ATP? An ATP sounds really kind of hairy, scary. It's just somebody somewhere else persistently attacking you. Advanced persistent threat. And so you, as the elected folks for the county, the counties need to begin to develop some basic erudition in what these things are. You can't just, it's not just cyber, it's not just out there. So I had the opportunity to be on a panel yesterday with our friends from Texas, and they understand the technology and they understand the threats, but the question is, does the leadership in that county? Because they can only do so much, but you have to understand. So I think that is a foundational step, just to understand what the concepts are, what are the big buckets of all this stuff.
So let me ask, please, let's take one more.
Can you identify yourself when you speak? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm Mark Curtis from Stevens County. I'm an IT director. I think IT directors do a pretty good job of enterprise protection of the network. Now it's the new vectors of shadow IT. I mean, IT directors say no to a lot of it's not an enterprise system. And when people going through and these systems where they're adding, going through Gmail, or they're adding browser-based systems, and they're downloading an application, and it's something it's hard for us to protect. So how do you see how to protect that shadow IT, the new term that people are struggling with?
So can I go? Can I take that one first? So we just released our Internet Security Threat Report, and I'm going to put a shameless pitch out. If anybody wants me to come to your county and do a threat briefing on our most recent Internet Security Threat Report, it takes all our information intelligence from around the world and puts it into a 55-page document. I'm happy to come out and brief you what it means. One of the biggest findings of that, and I think you were in the session yesterday, I talked a little bit about it, is what's called shadow cloud. Everyone talks about cloud. We had our presenters immediately before. They talked about cloud. Cloud is something that's generally outside of to some extent, outside of your control. And so one of the first things you have to be, the shadow IT, you have to know kind of what's going on outside your perimeters. One of the findings we identified through the ISTR was that when we polled CIOs, how many cloud apps do you have going on in your environment? They'll say 30 or 40. When in reality, when you begin to actually do the assessment, it was more like 1,000. If you don't know you've got 1,000 open doors going to different cloud apps, you cannot protect those things. You just can't do it. You have to know, as Steve was saying, you have to know your risk profile. You absolutely have to understand that. And there's no other way to defend against that.
And quite honestly, today, you have to make the assumption that there is no edge to your network. Mm-hmm. And you really need to make the assumption that you have to identify your critical data. You have to then protect that data wherever it can be. If you look forward-looking, and this is from Steve, not from a sponsor, But we're looking at a world where we're going to have to move into digital rights management as a way to reduce the risk to the data that you're responsible for. Digital rights management is, from a conversation I had this morning, it's kind of like Box, where you have control over your data. You can remove permissions to use that data. If somebody leaves, if the data gets taken out of the organization. However, the technology today is not where it needs to be. But 5 years from now, we'll be able to get there, and we'll be able to identify, you'll be able to identify that data and put protections on that data based upon its use.
And I'll add to this real quick, as someone who's not just from an IT security standpoint, but also being cognizant of adopting technology that fills those gaps of the shadow IT world, so they can do the things, not their personal Gmail necessarily, but things that they want to use, like whether it's a chat app to talk at work and things like that. You need to have the tools they need. We have a question over there, which is next step.
I'm a county commissioner, and when my IT manager's talking to me, I'm trying to find Rosetta Stone to do the interpretation for me as to what he's telling me. So this question may be out there. As far as risk, vulnerability of your system, and I don't even know if this term applies anymore, should we look into deploying like white hacking to see whether or not our system,
Absolutely.
Where the vulnerabilities are? So then followed up with how frequently, and do you let your IT manager know that we're deploying this?
Well, there are actually three different kinds of in the legitimate space, we'll call it penetration tests. There's white hat, where everybody knows about it and they're trying to get in. There's black hat, where there might be one person in the organization who's aware, and you let them try to get in. And there's gray hat. And gray hat is limited use of people that they're trying to get in. Now, currently, if you look at the trend is to offer bug bounties. And if you have an organization, especially one that writes code, if you don't have a bug bounty program, chances are you will in the future, because that's the way to get as many people as possible looking for things that are potential vulnerabilities.
Do you think
a bug bounty is you pay somebody when they find somewhere where somebody can get into your system.
Do you think there's appetite in the public sector to be paying people for hacking into government?
They're using it.
They're in federal government, in certain
federal
letter agencies.
Right. So do you think that's going to filter down to the state and local, you guys?
I think it has to.
I think it depends on budgets. I think you have to make decisions, and I think some of these, state and local governments are having to make pretty tough calls. So I'm not sure, what's going to fall where, but it certainly is part of an overall defense of your network.
I think it has to, and quite honestly, what is given out to someone who finds a bug in your software doesn't necessarily have to be cache-based.
Okay, that's a good point.
Can I just answer his question?
Sure,
Just
please.
real quickly.
Yeah.
The answer is your network can be penetrated, and absolutely, if somebody really wants to get in, the whole theory of an ATP, an advanced, APT, an advanced persistent threat, and I can talk good well. That an APT is that they will get in, and so and that has to change your posture. That has to change how resilient you are. That has to change how you back up. That has to change how you go out and hunt. They can get in. They may already be in. So don't even bother. Penetration test is good because it helps identify some of those threat vectors. But go in with the assumption that we're going to get hit, and then how do we mitigate the damage? And then move past that.
One step beyond that, go in with the assumption that you've already been hit, they're already in your system, and you have to identify and protect the data that's critical to the citizens.
And as I think you're noticing, this is more an art than a science. You've seen disagreements up here about how to go about it. There's a lot of different tactics and techniques, and I think part of it's learning to communicate. We have IT managers and county officials in the room. Raise your hand if you think communication could be better between the IT officials and the county. There we go. We all agree on something.
The people who just raised their hand, how many were IT?
I think that's really something to think about working on first, because as Thomas said and has been reflected in the having a knowledge and bringing that into the to the boardroom, those discussions, I think is very important to figure out how to move forward together. We have a question back, then over there, and then we'll keep going. Yeah, but we have folks with mics already.
You have one I probably can't see.
So I'm
We got you. You're on.
So I'm a newcomer to being elected. I've only been elected 22 years. So I have a few.
Where are you from, by the way?
King County.
Okay.
The 13th largest county in the country. Bigger. Washington State. It's the bigger than 15 states. So so we have a few issues. Although we are home to Microsoft and Google and Amazon, we have in our county. But here's my problem. I'm an elected official, and most days I think I'm a little busy. And I don't really have time to not have tools that work for me. I don't want to work for it. So Dropbox has not been preferred. I use it all the time. Don't tell my IT who's sitting over there. So I use it all the time because I need it. I want it. I'm not supposed to open attachments. I get 500 emails a day. I need to move them very quickly to make sure that it's going. So how do we do the things we need to do and still have the help that we need to get it going?
And I think this goes to the risk processing that Thomas was talking about a little bit prior. Thomas, does the panel want to talk about that?
So you've heard of, I don't know if anybody unpacked it. They talk about defense in depth, and that you need a whole kind of myriad of different defense postures. When you look at security, it's a platform kind of issue. And by platform, I mean something gets sent, something comes in, you open it, and there's lots of different processes in the middle. And that you need a system that's going to try to stop a lot of that stuff. And maybe it'll stop a lot of it, but it ain't going to stop all of it. And part of it is also going to be on you to say that, this looks a little funky. I mean, that's kind of not, that's probably too simplistic an answer.
And Thomas is actually right, but you need to look at that defense in depth. You need filtering in your email system so that a lot of the things that have a high probability of being malicious are going to get filtered out. You'll never see them.
I think it just, need to think of it in a more simplified way. So for your issue, just like he was saying, that there are things that will look at those attachments for you. I mean, I think sometimes we're expecting end users to be cybersecurity professionals when cybersecurity professionals can't even take enough classes to keep up with what's going on. So it's about the risk mitigation and getting, I think what you're getting at is there's got to be more automated things where you don't have to worry about that. You've got to just do what you need to do for your business. And so that's what I would say is look for those kinds of tools and ask your particular IT department for more of that. And then think about the outbound filtering, because there's a lot of ways to protect now. You could accidentally click on it, you could get something on the inside, but you will prevent that breach of the data going out if you have that automated outbound filtering that's doing all that for you. So that would be my recommendation.
And part of the challenge is that the attackers know that there's an issue, and they're focusing a lot of their attacks for people who are looking at their email on their phones. So something that would stick out as like a sore thumb on your PC screen, you're gonna brush over on the little 3-inch screen you're looking at on your phone, and they know that, so they're really trying to focus on that to get you to click through.
I would only add to that, as a non-security professional, also have the conversation with your CIO about what level of risk. The only box that's completely safe is the one that's completely unplugged and maybe smashed. So, at some
there's
point,
somebody downstairs who's selling that.
I bet so. But I think you have to kind of have that discussion about what capabilities and what data needs to be secured in what ways, and what devices we can say, okay, if someone hacks it, we're just going to kind of smash it then, and not because it's segmented off from the rest of our more sensitive things on the network.
We have a really great IT department, so a lot of that's already being done. But if you're going to talk to elected officials, you really have to tell them how is it going to make their life easier.
Right.
And I think that's the part that I'm not hearing as much of, that this is going to make your life easier by this tool. And I think that's really important.
So I got to tell you, anybody who sells you a tool and says this is going to make your life easier is lying to you. Don't buy it.
We have a great tool for you at Symantec. So it was interesting. So I was at a conference the other day with Vince Cerf, who was kind of one of the big guys in the internet. Yeah, he's awesome, and it becomes this trade-off, and there's no two ways about it. Security will make things harder for you, any business process, and that there's going to be a limit. So in terms of, like, you talk about Dropbox. Think about Gmail, I apologize for those who already heard this. So you think about the DNC, the Democratic National Committee. The hack that took place was a result of somebody using a cloud app that was unprotected. That Podesta got sent a spoofed email, normed to him, saying, "Hey, your password's been hacked. You need to change it." It was the bad guys, and they sent a spoof link. He sent it out to his IT folks doing the right thing, saying, and the guy mistyped, instead of saying this is a legitimate email, or rather than saying this is an illegitimate email, he typed this is a legitimate email, and then he sent it back. And then Podesta, instead of clicking on the link that his security guy had sent, had done it somewhere else. Had there been other protections in place, we wouldn't have had the DNC hack, or we may not have had the DNC hacked. It may have looked different. Yeah. So that would have encumbered him just a little bit in his IT system. But think about the difference that had in terms of the election, regardless of your political bent.
Yeah. Let's.
Sorry, Mitch.
No problem. Let's go over there. Hold on, Steve. So let's go to the guy with the mic, and then we'll go to.
Is this on? So Bill Kehoe with King County, that's my council member that was just there. She invites
He's going to want to see you after this.
She invites us regularly to talk about security, so we appreciate her immensely. I just want to emphasize a couple things that I'm hearing today that I think are really important. One is the segmentation of our network, which you touched on, but that has increasingly helped us isolate and recover from some of these ransomware attacks. Second is the assessment. That has to happen on a regular basis, and that is a way to communicate with our elected officials. If we can say, this is a credible assessment that was done, here are the gaps, and here's what we need to close those gaps. That helps the conversation.
Right, and quite honestly, for segmentation, I would go to micro-segmentation, especially with the virtual networking components that are coming out today. You can get your segmentation down to a very, very small universe, and then you can manage it using simple standard principles.
Mitch, can I just make one comment?
Yeah. I have one more thing.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
That we still have a cultural problem where it's looked on, security is looked as an IT issue.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of our business folks that just want to assume that we're 100% covered, and therefore not, it's IT's problem. And we still have a long road to go to educate them that it's all of our problem, and we need everyone to participate if we're going to be as safe as we can, knowing that we'll never be safe.
So just one comment on one of the things he was saying, and no offense, I don't think anybody's doing this well, that when you talk about cybersecurity programs, you're pushing a lot of dollars out, whether you know it or not, but no one really knows how to do accountability. No one really knows how to do performance management really, really well. You can look at other fields where they've done a much better job of performance management. I have not seen the same kind of homologue in cybersecurity yet.
Suzanne, I want to make sure you get in a word if you want.
I want to say we have a tool that's going to make your life easier. No, seriously, we don't do everything. Of course, you need a risk assessment. I love the segmentation. I think that's really great. But I still say back to something I said right at the beginning, the attack space and everything about this problem is growing exponentially. We are here, and there is something that counties are using so effectively, and it just makes the problem a lot smaller and manageable. So I would invite you, if you are interested, please come see us.
Well, we have one more.
We're downstairs,
Sorry, we'll move there and then.
Well, anyway, no, she asked if there's something simple. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
It really does.
At the commissioner
really does
level,
what we do.
We're usually involved in writing policies and procedures.
Yeah.
Can you give us 3 top policies or procedures that would help prevent what we've been talking about today?
Sure. Let's do because there's a couple more questions, so let's.
Fine.
Yeah. Go for it.
Quick policies and procedures. User education is huge. That's probably your number one. You need you need some sort of a policy on patch management, and you need some sort of a policy on a communication plan, breach communication plan.
Thomas?
So when you start talking about policy, who's guiding your efforts? And so you have to develop some kind of I mean, you've heard this. Well, maybe you haven't heard this. Is that cybersecurity is not necessarily an IT issue. So you're going to need to develop some kind of interdisciplinary, work group or way to kind of bring together, because you have health systems, you have voting systems, you've got, education. You have to be able to coordinate all those efforts because you can get scale in terms of dollars. So some kind of, it's not just an IT issue. I mean, you've got to look at it at a governance, at developing a governance body. And that's one of the things that when I was at NGA that we worked very hard at. The other thing is you have to know is where are your resources going? How much do you spend on cybersecurity as a component of your IT spend overall? It's probably not what you think, and it's probably not buying down what you think.
I'd say that you want to, whatever the policies are that you are going to deploy, you want to tie that to your security awareness or your user education training. And now there are automated platforms that are out there that actually have all the modules. They can be tailored, and they can link right in and reference your policies. So I think with video now, and especially newer generations being very visually focused, it's reinforcing those policies with little small vignettes and where they give them a little quiz so they're interactive. So I just think policy is really only good if you have training around it so people know what you're talking about and how to enforce it. Otherwise, it's a book, it's dusty, or just sitting in your file system somewhere. So that would be my recommendation.
Which
There's
means
great stuff out there.
you have to start with a framework.
So let's
Totally
do one
agree.
last question real quick.
Totally agree.
You talked about microsegmentation, which is there's some FTE overhead on that. So what do you think of the application whitelisting? Because once it's initially set up, but it's hard to maintain. So what are your ideas about application whitelisting on the network?
Personally, I'm in favor of whitelisting. It's a lot of work. The assumption has to be that a user will not use the county-owned device for personal use, which today is actually a fair assessment to make, because I would lay odds that everybody in this room and probably 80% of your employees have their own smartphones. And let them use that. That becomes their personal communication vehicle, and it isolates personal work from personal traffic from business traffic.
Quick, Tom.
I think the answer is yes. But I want to go back to the councilman's question. One of the things you have to have in place, and you may not have as a component, is some kind of response plan. What happens if elections get taken down? What happens if county schools or something like that gets taken down? You have to have a response plan, and it has to be mandated.
I think there are tools out there now that also do some automation for you with your whitelisting and your blacklisting, and I would just highly recommend that. It's not the be-all, end-all, and some people are like, oh, you shouldn't automate. I'm like, oh my gosh, people are overwhelmed. So I would say take a look at that. Absolutely, you want to use it, but gosh, it's constant. New technology, cool stuff, getting cheaper. Get out there and use some of that. So I'm all about making life easier, making it usable. So I think it's the way to go.
Well, with that, I think we'll thank our panel for being here. Let's give them a
job,
round
Mitch.
of applause.
Hoorah.
Thank you.
And we hope you guys enjoy the rest of the day. There's a general session coming up at 3:15. I'll also put in a plug again for the Route 50 Roadshow Evening Cocktails and Conversation, which will be happening in Union, I believe, later tonight. You can find more information both in your packet as well as downstairs. We have something across from registration with a little more information. So hope to see you guys there. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mitch.